that's why we have to think as black people. Stop singing and dancing and start thinking.
Wow.
Thinking and reading. I say reading is more important than watching TV.
People of color, especially children, are much more likely to be kicked out of Seattle Public Library branches. That's what journalist Erica C. Barnett found in a new story published in the South Seattle Emerald. She told me the details of what she found out.
What I found out is that a disproportionate number of the people being kicked out of Seattle Public Libraries are African American or Hispanic. Between January and July of this year, more than a third of the people who got excluded from the library were African American, which is about 5 times the prevalence of African Americans in the Seattle population.
And what did you find out with regard to kids?
All of the kids who were kicked out of Seattle Public Libraries were children of color, specifically either African American or Hispanic. That's 100% of 52 kids who were kicked out.
All of the kids?
Every single one, under 16.
Wow. Is that a situation of a few rogue librarians kicking people out, or is this something of a system-wide problem?
It's primarily at a few specific branches in the South End. And when I talked to library spokeswoman Andra Addison, she told me that one thing that I may be seeing there is that parents are dropping their kids off at the library sort of as a safe place for them to go when they're not able to be taken care of by their parents. So you see a lot of kids at these libraries just kind of hanging out using the computers. So it's primarily kids, at High Point, at Columbia Branch, and in the Rainier Valley and Central District.
What are some reasons why these kids are getting kicked out of the library?
This is what I found really interesting. A lot of the things that they're getting kicked out for are things that you think of as kid behavior. So there was one kid who was kicked out for slapping his friend with a laptop cord. That was classified as assault. There was another example where there were some kids that were playing under the computer tables and eating candy. And those kids were 5 years old and 6 years old, and they were kicked out along with a 10-year-old companion for violating library rules. So what happens when these kids are kicked out? Who knows? They're just asked to leave. And I've been told that in some cases the parents are contacted, but there's not a policy about that.
You spoke with the Seattle Public Library about this issue, so what did they tell you?
With kids, she said, look, we just look at the behavior. We don't look at the race. She told me that because we're dedicated to improving educational and information access to everyone, and this I'm quoting here from Andra Addison, exclusion is the last resort. So she says, we try to tell these kids to behave, but ultimately, if they're making the library unpleasant for everybody else, we're going to kick them out.
So what's your big takeaway from this?
I think there's an issue that we need to address in our library system and in public spaces in general with implicit bias. And there is some question when you look at these numbers, which are showing, a disproportionate number of African Americans, both adults and teenagers and children, being expelled from libraries. There's a question about why is that happening? I mean, in every individual case, you can look at it and say, okay, this is the reason this individual case happened. And you can say, well, there's a justification here. But when you look at the numbers in the big picture, you're looking at hundreds and hundreds of exclusions over time, and there's a pattern. And when we see patterns like that, we need to look at them with a critical eye and say, do we need to figure out a reason this pattern is happening?
That's Seattle journalist Erica C. Barnett. Her story appears in the South Seattle Emerald. We also reached out to the Seattle Public Library for comment. We asked Public Services Director Heather McLeland-Weiser why so many kids of color are being kicked out of branches in the South End.
That is probably happening because of things that are happening in the community outside of the library. In those communities, we have a lot of kids in our branches who are being supervised by an older sibling. That isn't necessarily the most successful approach for them.
She also told us the library is planning to reassess its rules of conduct policy in the near future.
Seattle, my beloved context of white supremacy. Gus T. Renegade, and for another broadcast, hopefully, to share constructive information on the global system of white supremacy information for non-white people, victims of white supremacy. Today's date, Sunday, March 2, 2025. So I have been told it is Women's History Month, very beginning, right? Day number 2, as they tell me. Whew. If it is, I have got a list for you. Get your pen, break out that phone, got your notes, you're ready to roll, thumbs ready to do some typing. Okay, here we go. Charlemagne Hill Rollins, Carrie Coleman Robinson, Polly Ann Myers, Autherine Lucy, Ernestine Denham Talbert. Great list. We'll chat about some of these folks today. Man, go and do some digging, sleuthing. Women's History Month. You have a great list to get started with right there, and maybe inspiration. Dr. Welsing, you heard her say it. Hopefully that's one thing maybe people will remember all of our years of broadcasting. Reading is more important than watching television. Man, read. Anyway, our guest for today's broadcast, just wow, so much, and it really, much of it goes back to, what did I just say? Reading is more important than watching television. Just, if you're going to talk about a system of white supremacy racism, reading is going to come up in so many different ways. Books, and Gus T. Now, I am a worthless Negro from Virginia, but I have facilitated a book club for 13 years. How many people do you know have facilitated a book club? And I think we're pretty much without interruption. It's not like, we got lazy and said, well, Netflix got something pretty cool. We're going to take a year off or, come back. We are right here. We don't even take breaks within the year. Rolling. We have 13 years of reading, not just talking about it. It is demonstrated, and we talk to a lot of authors in between our reading. It's almost like the book club is separate from the normal broadcast. Any hoodles. In addition, I have been saying of late, within the last year or so, specifically nonfiction reading, and then get a book, nonfiction, that is actually published from the current calendar year. I've been saying that for about the last 2 years or so. Be current. There's so many books that are published about racism. Do some studying. You'll find reasons to turn that TV off, at least for a little while. Turn that Netflix streaming, whatever. You can pause it, come back to it. You will find some things that will catch your interest. 2024 just ended. I try, right? We're just very beginning of 2025. I try to go to the library, beginning of the year. I will check what did I miss from 2024 that looks good, and first 2 months of 2025. Anything good? Yes. I just told you February 19th was a monster haul. I got 25 books in one day. What did I just, 2024 books I missed, 2025 books that are already out that look amazing, all directly about white supremacy racism. The one we're talking about today was one of the best that caught my attention on February 19th, and it's about reading and racism. Are you serious? My God. Amazing book. In fact, I can jump right to it since we talk about reading all the time. We've done so many works and talked about all the different ways that white people have closed down the school. My beloved worthless Negro from Virginia, haven't we done programs on how they closed the schools down? Prince Edward County for 5 years. Didn't we do multiple programs? Get white people from Virginia on to talk about that repeatedly? What's the impact? Asked you to think, what would it be like? Imagine any point in your academic career, you can't go to school for 5 years. You pick. So that's first grade to 5th grade, 8th grade to graduation, 12th grade. You pick. Yee. But let's fast forward. We go to page 108, set them up for this here book. It reads, chapter title, From Brown, meaning Brown v. Board of Education, to Little Rock, which we also read about. Book club, 2 times. Melba Batillo Beals. Signature work. Anywho, page 93, it reads, few examples of a black school's librarian's impact on a young person, however, are as telling as Mildred Grady's influence on Ali Neal as a rural Arkansas 16-year-old senior high school student, a poor black kid with an attitude. He later admitted Neal cut class as his segregated school in 1957 and wandered into the library set up by teacher librarian Mildred Grady. In one of Grady's English classes, Neal had previously brought her to tears with disrespectful behavior. In the library, Neal noticed a book with a sexy woman on the cover, a practice that pulp paperback publishers commonly used in the 1950s to sell series fiction. The book was by Frank Yerby, a black author of romance novels set in the antebellum South who had never been cited in standard high school library acquisition guides. Because he did not want his classmates to know he was reading a novel, Neal chose to steal the book rather than check it out, and then took it home. There he had a transformative reading experience and found himself loving the book. He sneaked it back into its rightful place in the library, where he found yet another Yerby, which he also stole. Twice more this happened, and gradually Neal began picking up other books. Reading got to be a thing I liked. Imagine that. After graduation, Neal went on to college, then law school, and then, in 1991, became Arkansas's first black district attorney and later a judge, and then an appellate court judge. At his 1970 high school reunion, however, Mildred Grady approached Neal and told him she had seen him steal the book in 1957, but thought better of confronting him. Instead, she drove 70 miles to Memphis to find another Yerby, and twice more made the trip as Neal repeated his thefts, each time purchasing the books with her own money, and all in hopes of turning around a rude adolescent who had made her cry. In 2009, Neal told National Public Radio, "I credit Mrs. Grady for getting me in the habit of reading, so I was able to go to law school and survive." I could have cried. Are you serious? What in the world? There are a lot of great anecdotes in the book, and this is on NPR, so you can hear Mrs. Grady directly. I mean, what in the... And he became a judge. Like, wait a minute. He became a judge. Like, whoa. Is reading that... You do have to go to law school and I think read like a paragraph or two to get through law school. So, wow. What sort of impact? Why did Dr. Welsing, a medical doctor, why did she say that all the time? Reading is more important than watching television. You think Judge Neal, you think he would have been a judge if he had just been watching TV? They didn't have that many channels in 57, but still. He had just been kicking up watching TV. Psh, I could have cried. And how many white librarians do you think would have turned a blind eye to a Negro male theft and drove 70 miles? This is before the freedom rides. I was thinking, whoa, I don't know if I would want to drive 70 miles at that time. Like, whoa. Maybe you survive. They had the Green Book at that time for a reason. Maybe you survive with no trouble. Maybe you don't. For a black male thief, I could cry. Reading is more important. Anyway, one of many super important stories in a book all about reading and racism. That really could have been the title of the book, like that pithy. However, it is not. It is called In Silence or Indifference, Racism and Jim Crow Segregated Public School Libraries. What an amazing work. Just published last year, and I bet they don't have it on display at your local library. The author joining us live to chat it up. So happy to have him with us for our Sunday evening. Dr. Wayne A. Weigand. Dr. Weigand, you're with us, sir.
Well, thank you, Gus, for inviting me. I'm delighted to be able to talk about this. By the way, can I make a comment about your lead-in on the Seattle Public Libraries?
Sure, let's hear it.
Okay. In the course of doing research on In Silence Indifference, I discovered that a number of professions had surveyed their members to test their racial attitudes. That has never happened in librarianship. As you know from reading through In Silence or Indifference, librarianship as a profession, and the American Library Association in particular, have been avoiding engaging a conversation about racism within their history. And this is just one more manifestation of that. There are no surveys that analyze racial attitudes in librarianship. There are plenty of surveys that do that in education, but librarianship does not have one.
Fascinating, although I'm not surprised. When I spoke with the executives at Seattle Public Library, because you don't know, well, I am a black male, so I would be in the cohort of people who have a very tough time going to Seattle Public Library. We're in the cusp, Black History Month, Women's History Month. I went in before, most recently, and I told them, wow, you all have a display up for Black History Month. It features 20 authors. None of them are black males. This is for Black History Month. You couldn't find one book written by a black dude who wasn't a rapist or a thief. They refused to change it, and the justification was this was a twofer. This was for Black History Month and Women's History Month. So they left it up for 60 days, 0 black male authors. And I've seen this replay more than once for Black History Month, where they totally, and the they is white people, because that's who's in charge at Seattle Public Library. And I even asked, I said, dang, do you all have a problem with black males? Do you have any black male staff? And I looked around. No black male librarians. Yeah, it is a very white woman dominated profession. Anyway, this fascinating text, I guess for you, Dr. Weigand, you are classified as a white man. Is that true?
Yeah, white heterosexual old geezer.
Okay.
I'm a retired faculty member from several accredited library schools where people who want to become professional librarians need to get their master's in library science or master's in information science degree. I've taught at them for about 35 years, but I'm retired now. But still doing research and writing, as you can see by my publishing In Silence or Indifference.
For sure. Where did you do all that great teaching at?
I taught for 10 years at the University of Kentucky, then 16 years at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I finished up at Florida State University, which is right across the tracks from Florida A&M University, historically black college and university.
FAMU. We hear about them all the time for some reason.
Yeah, in fact, my wife my wife is a law professor, and she was teaching at Marquette Law School when I was working in Tallahassee. She decided to retire, but when she got down there, she was kind of anxious to get some work, and Florida A&M University's law school, which is located in Orlando and wanted to get accredited, called her and hired her for 3 years because she had gone through the accreditation process with the American Bar Association several times. So we have fairly close ties to Florida A&M University.
Fascinating, fascinating. All righty. We'll see if we can cover as much of In Silence or Indifference as we can while we have you here. Before we hop into the meat of the text, we ask all of our guests, we start off the term racism and the term white supremacy. I use them as synonyms, and I use the same definition for both terms. That definition: a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you think such a system exists? Do you think that definition is accurate?
I think such a system exists, and I would only quarrel that there are a lot of people who exercise white supremacy without realizing that they're doing it.
You think there are a lot of people who are classified as white who practice racism without being aware of this?
Yes.
Okay. Fascinating. Fascinating. I'll ponder on that as we proceed through the book. One other question I've been asking a number of our guests, and I chuckled because New Republic, he mentions a number of publications, Dr. Weigand, in Silence or Indifference, and New Republic pops up. I think I've seen that news magazine in a number of books that I've been reading over the past month. Anyway, non-white author, he wrote, it's been a decade now, can't believe it, but he wrote, talking about racism, white people are often greatly and sincerely pained by racism, but rarely are they pained enough. I've been asking our white guests now for a decade, can't believe it. Based on, you're a white person, based on the white people that you know, and you've written this book, so your studies of racism and what it means to be classified as white, do you think that a significant number of individuals who are classified as white are often greatly and sincerely pained by racism?
Well, that's a hard one to toss at me, Gus. No, I don't think there are a whole lot of. Well, let me say it this way. I was born and raised into a blue collar culture in the Midwest that was almost entirely white. And it was homophobic, it was racist, it was anti-Semitic, it was sexist. And I've been trying to shed the threads of those isms for most of my life. I'm a different person at the age of 78 than I certainly was at the age of 16. I can see when I go back home that many of those isms are still in existence, but I've gone through years of education and years of researching and writing to address many of those isms, and because I'm a different person, I can see in those people I visit when I go home, it's still there. They don't know that, but it's still there. I don't know if that answers your question or not. I'm convinced the people who I grew up with exercise, manifest white supremacy in various ways, but they're not that conscious of it. They think it's a natural world that they're a natural world they live in that has ideas that they then apply to the life experiences around them. I'm not sure that's all that clear, but I guess I wouldn't agree with you that it's so visible and obvious to a lot of the white people I know and grew up with.
Okay, so let me parse out. Number one, at the beginning of your response, Dr. Weigand, did I hear you say you thought about it for a second and sounded like you said, no, I don't think there are a sizable number of white people who are greatly pained about this? Did I hear that?
Oh, no. There are, when we can argue about sizable number. Yes, there are a sizable number who are greatly pained about this. It so happens that my wife, a law professor, was at the University of Oklahoma and became Anita Hill's best friend there. She went to Washington with Anita for the Hill-Thomas hearings. So I'm able to witness racism sort of from the inside out because of the connection through Anita Hill. Cheryl's been friends with Anita ever since. I'm friends with Anita, and we view white supremacy's. It was so obvious to us what white supremacy did to that whole situation that it's sort of part of us now. So, yes, I represent a sizable number of people who experience pain at what white supremacists do. But I also know I come from a culture in which there are a lot of people who do not experience that pain, in part because they know very few black people or Hispanic people or Chinese Americans or Arab Americans. So I don't know where we would quarrel on what you call sizable. That's the best I can answer you.
Oh, we haven't had a quarrel just yet. Just asking questions thus far. Well, I guess one, is it okay for me to ask, since you were talking about the place that you grew up? Where did you grow up, Dr. Weigand?
In central Wisconsin.
Oh, okay, we back to Wisconsin. Is this close to Milwaukee?
90 miles north of Milwaukee, on the shores of Lake Michigan, is a town called Manitowoc. That's where I was born and raised.
Okay, and it sounds like this is.
And it had. When I was a kid, it had sundown laws.
Oh, you took my question, man. You took my question. You took my question. All right, so this is a racially restricted region. We don't have no black people. Did you all have one of those signs? No niggers? Did you all have one of those signs like that, or it was just enforced?
No, that I don't remember. But I will tell you an anecdote. My mother, my dearly beloved mother, she died at the age of 97. And Cheryl and I went back to visit her, maybe about 8 years ago. And as we were driving down a street, I noticed a black teenager walking. And I said, Mom, do you have any blacks in this city now? And she says, no. And I said, well, there's a black teenager. Okay, now here I'm going to hit you, Gus, with the invisible white supremacy. Mom responded to me, oh, they can't help it. Okay? So there's the invisible white supremacy stuff that I was talking about. She had no idea what she said was racist. Mom's dead now, so I can tell you that anecdote.
What? I don't even understand what that means. You said you see a black teen walking. You ask your mom, hey, do you all have any black people that live here now? And she says no. You said, well, look at that. There's a black person right there. And she said, oh, well, they can't help it. What? I don't even know. What does that mean?
Yeah.
What does that mean? What do you think she meant when she said that?
What does that mean? The young man can't help that he's black.
Oh.
That's as gracious as she can be. And that pretty much manifests the culture in which I was raised.
Huh.
There was an automatic demeaning of a human being.
Wow. Well, let's ask this, because I've heard about those sundown towns. We read James Lowen's book, Sundown Towns. Did you hear racist jokes growing up in Wisconsin? I'm sorry?
The N-word was very common. Yeah, the N-word was very common.
Okay, okay.
Well, let me give you another example. Okay? As a kid, the Milwaukee Braves were doing very well in the 1950s. Every Sunday morning, I would, when I would get up, the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, which was the major newspaper in the state of Wisconsin at the time, I would get up and I'd read about the Milwaukee Braves. And Henry Aaron was my hero.
Mm-hmm.
One day I read that the Milwaukee suburb called Mequon, he could not purchase a home for his family in Mequon, and I could not understand it. How could you not want Henry Aaron to live next to you? That confused me. That's where I started seeing race as an issue at the age of 10. And my parents, the culture in which I was raised had no problem with Henry Aaron being denied housing in Mequon, Wisconsin in the 1950s. So maybe that tells you a little bit about the culture I was raised in.
For sure. The late Hank Aaron, we miss you. I was thinking of him with Atlanta. I'm not a baseball. Anyway, that Hank Aaron, we miss you, victim of racism. Do you remember any of the racist jokes that you heard at that time, even about Hank Aaron? Did they have any racist jokes about Hank Aaron?
Golly, now you're testing a memory that's 78 years old now, so I don't remember specific jokes about Hank Aaron, no. There were other jokes, but I really don't want to share them. It gives me pain.
Man, you said in your book, I don't think even you or some of these other white people who are allegedly supportive of black people can't be as pained as Hank Aaron and the rest of us victims of racism. And there are fascinating books on racist jokes, and that's something that we have studied for 16 years. I am fascinated with racist jokes because they reveal so much, and particularly who they target. I would super appreciate it if you could just one. If you could remember one, that would be great.
Oh, please no. I will not do that. It hurts me. It's a world I left, and I do never want to return to it.
Let's see. Did you hear more than 20 of these?
I admire. Oh yes, Gus. I admire your courage in confronting them. I don't have that courage anymore.
Oh man, the racist man. White people and I'm just for our non-white audience. I don't know if Luka and Bron James are playing today, but the data is there. White people search Negro jokes on par with their searches for the Lakers. So you can check that for any era, Kobe, Magic, Luka. White people, they love the racist jokes for some reason. When I come to ask, whoa. But any other time, they got whole books that have gone on for years. And did you hear more than 100 of these racist jokes, Dr. Wiegand, growing up, Wisconsin?
Is that right? I'm sure I did. Yeah.
And we've heard that so many.
And really, after the Mequon incident with Henry Aaron, I kind of just tuned it out. I didn't fight with it because I was a teenager or an adolescent, and I'm listening to adults talk about this, and I just sort of tune it out. I'm also, I grew up, my time as a developing adult was in the second civil rights movement, 1954, let's say, to 1974. That's when I matured into adulthood, and so Martin Luther King Jr. is one of my heroes. James Baldwin is one of my heroes, and I admired them. It pained me to see how those kids were being treated. Little Rock, Arkansas, for example, that was about the time that Henry Aaron was denied housing in Mequon, Wisconsin, and I just tied the two together. So it just does not give me any pleasure. I cannot say one of those jokes anymore. If I start hearing one, I walk away.
I perk up if I start hearing it and try to write it down so I can think about it for a little while and parse it out for you all, and then I share. Any hoodles, much obliged for sharing with us, Dr. Weigand. We will get to the fascinating book that you penned, even though a lot of what we've been talking about is right here with the book. The title, In Silence or Indifference. In fact, let me give folks the full title of the text one more time. In Silence or Indifference, Racism, and Jim Crow Segregated Public School Libraries. I think very direct with the title. What were you trying to solve a problem with this text, Dr. Weigand?
Well, no. Well, actually, I'm quoting Pauli Murray, a civil rights activist from about that time. She would observe the white kids in the school bus go by while she walked to the black school that she attended, and what they saw as they went by her, they looked at her with silence or indifference. And I thought, perfect title for what I was finding in researching the book.
Fascinating. And what was your goal? What was your reason for writing this text about racism in U.S. public libraries?
Well, you cited a few names at the beginning of your intro. Carrie Coleman Robinson, authoring Lucy Foster, Ernestine Denham Talbert. Those were people who had a role to play in the history of American public school libraries, who were completely ignored by the profession, either in its publications or in its conference programming. And once I discovered that, I thought, well, this isn't right, because the nation's library community in general, and the American Library Association in particular, like to portray themselves as defenders of intellectual freedom, proponents of the freedom to read, and opponents of censorship. And the structure that the profession was showing me between Brown versus the Board of Education and the resignation of Richard Nixon, just to pick out a particular date in the 1970s, was showing me silence or indifference to a group of black school librarians. Not only were they engaging in activities that prevented black school librarians from performing their professional responsibilities, they were not only engaging in those activities, the profession at large was not bringing these activities into the public sphere. There was no discussion of it in the library press, and there was no discussion of it or conference programming at the annual programs. That every state has a library association, Gus, and the American Library Association is the National Library Association. There were no library associations anywhere in the country that I could find any discussion of the issues of racist practice towards black librarians.
That is staggering, especially for as long as all this went on, and Supreme Court cases, and this is front page news over and over and over for all these different regions across the country, and zero. Wow. That even, in fact, I'm going to the text. This is on page 6 from the prologue of the book. You write, except for Atlanta University students, librarianship and its professional associations, including the American Library Association and the American Association of School Libraries, almost entirely ignored the subject of racially segregated school libraries in its literature during the Civil Rights Movement, in the midst of which the AASL passed in 1956 and revised in 1968 a school library bill of rights with only oblique references to race, in quotes. Here I remind readers that the library literature was published by H.W. Wilson, the same company that issued Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature, which indexed general interest magazines like Newsweek, Time, U.S. News and World Report, that heavily covered events sparked by the Brown decision. Wilson's decision to not also include in library literature those citations to articles covering racially charged civil rights protests involving librarianship that RGPL routinely covered must have been deliberate. That word always sticks out to me when I read any book about racism, because it's very rare for people to use the word deliberate when talking about things that white people have done to maintain a system of white supremacy racism, even though it would obviously have to be, yeah, a lot of white people have deliberately done this. That, I think, is super important. That's right at the beginning of the book, to say that this was a willful act to not talk about these issues, just current events, correct?
You are correct. As a matter of fact, the title I sent into the publisher, the University Press of Mississippi, was the first title I wanted was In Silence or Indifference, Librarianship's Willful Silence, or willful ignorance of the issues of race in school libraries. I did want to put the word willful into the title because it was willful. Now, let me just take that a little step farther, if I might, Gus. With that structure, that something like the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature set up, which perpetuated white supremacy, I would say the vast majority of librarians practicing in the profession outside the Jim Crow South probably were not aware that this was perpetuating white supremacy. They perceived the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature as increasing access to information because you would go to it to find information about other things. So as far as they were concerned, they were carrying out their professional responsibility by making the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature available, but they were unaware that the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature itself was upholding systematic racism through the periodicals it chose to cover. One more step I'll take with the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature. Crisis Magazine, which I think went out to about 100,000 people. It was the NAACP magazine, edited by W.E.B. Du Bois. And it started, as I recall, in 1910. Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature started in 1900. Crisis was never picked up by Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature and indexed. Thus, librarians, let's say in Opelika, Alabama, who may have subscribed to Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature, were inclined not to subscribe to Crisis because it wasn't indexed, and thus the accessibility of the material in Crisis wasn't as easy to get to as the information in Time magazine or U.S. News and World Report. It wasn't until 2 years after Brown versus the Board of Education that Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature even picked up one black magazine, and that's Ebony. So all that time, all the way through the first half of the 20th century, African Americans in black neighborhoods of Washington, D.C., Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, if they went to the library and the librarian said, well, go to the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature to find the information you want, that guide gave those kids no access to black periodicals. There was no indexing of those black periodicals. So that's part of the structure I talk about in Silence or Indifference. That became an obstacle to unearthing information about black activities.
Context of White Supremacy. Again, our guest, author, librarian, or library scholar, say it that way, Dr. Wayne A. Weigand. I want to get to another important section from the prologue, which is also a massive deviation from what I typically read on racism. I just want to point out from your response there, where you said that whites in the North who they're putting these guides and lists together as a resource, really thinking that they're helping librarians and educators, get information together for students and such, that whites in the North, that they didn't know that they're a part of this racist scaffolding, excluding material and including a lot of racist material to perpetuate racism. That's one point I strongly disagree with, and I would even point to some of the logic from your text. I would just make it another pithy one. We'll get to this one later, but my pithy response is white people who do things that do not support the system of white supremacy racism, they will get in trouble with other white people. And you have lots of examples of that in the book. To the prologue, you write, and I thought this was so great because I pay attention to words and spelling. Everyone else does the opposite. This is such a major break from pattern. This is page 9, setting the table for the book. Page 8, page 8 in the prologue. He writes, because of this silence and indifference school library literature that addresses the years 1954, 1974, both contemporary and historical, carries with it an overwhelmingly white perspective. To drive this point home throughout the narrative that follows, readers will notice I always capitalize the word white and regularly insert the adjective white with a capital W before nouns like establishment, association, administration, and libraries. All of that is deliberate and an attempt to recreate for the reader some of what black school librarians and black students integrating in white schools must have felt when they engaged white public school libraries in the Jim Crow South. Over the generations, librarians have prided themselves on providing neutral services as a professional accomplishment. I hope that the use of the word capital W white in my narrative shows that belief has all too often been misplaced in the American library history. Whew. That is so massive at the beginning. And again, I'm not aware, maybe you are, but I have not seen any other work where white, we capitalize it every time and then even give a reason. Why did you think this was so important to set this up immediately for readers?
Well, Gus, I live and work in a professional community. I love my professional community because, in part, it has provided me with a rich, intellectual, stimulating life. I'm a historian by training, and as a historian, one is called upon to paint history not only with halos, but also with warts. And as I worked in the library profession, I noticed that there was almost an ethos that focused almost entirely on the halos and not on the warts. And because it does not focus on the warts, many of the stories I uncovered that were never discussed in the library literature or at constant programming were new. And so I wanted to demonstrate to readers that the world they lived in was primarily white and perpetuated white thinking, white superiority, and that in order for my current contemporary library community, they had to think about their history as helping to perpetuate white supremacy. So that was very deliberate. No one resisted it. I can't say it's by original with me. I picked it up from a couple of other authors who did some of the same stuff. And so I adopted the idea. But yes, to a contemporary audience of librarians right now, there's little perception that what they did, let's say in the 20th century, helped perpetuate white supremacy. So I wanted to knock them upside the head by using those words.
Fighting words immediately. Love it. And being accurate about things. I always capitalize the W in white when I'm talking about white supremacy and people classified as white. I guess before I get to some of the just, wow, important history, I did want to go back to make sure we got as well, because this, you come up bopping people upside the head with this capital W and using white supremacy, which a lot of people do not like, using that term. Who was your intended audience? Like, who did you, Dr. Weigand, think is going to be sitting down and, yes, in silence or indifference, this is what I want to snuggle up on the sofa and read? Who did you, was this an academic book? Was this for the general public?
One would like to think it's for the general public, and I hope the general public becomes interested in it. I wrote it primarily for the nation's library community. In the past several years, for example, the American Library Association has regularly been issuing statements about how it has defended librarians and academic freedom for 140 years. In 2026, the American Library Association will be celebrating its 150th anniversary. And because it has ignored the warts of its history to a large extent, it makes statements which aren't historically accurate. And so for a library association to say for 140 years it had supported librarians, I have to come forward and say, no, you have not. And here's a story about black school librarians in the Jim Crow between 1954 and 1974 that proves that is a historically inaccurate statement. That's primarily the audience to whom I wrote it. It would be nice if historians picked up on it, if educators picked up on it, if the general public picked up on it, and let's say people in my age demographic reflected upon their school library experiences in the 1950s and 1960s and said, hey, you know, there was a lot of white literature in my school library and not much black literature authored by black people. So I would primarily, my audience was the American Nation's library community, but I'm happy to have anybody else read it and reflect on what might have happened in their youth in a school library.
Fascinating. Okay, that's great to know. And then when you told us about your original thought process around the title, and you wanted it to say willful ignorance, and that's not the title, so was there pushback about you including the word willful in the title?
Well, yeah, whenever you send a book manuscript to a university press, they're certainly interested in the subject matter. Does it fit the series profiles that we publish? But they also recognize that in this day and age, certain words get picked up more frequently than other words. And so racism, University Press of Mississippi recognized putting the word racism in the title, and then specifically Jim Crow public school libraries, those words would reach particular markets for them and increase the potential for sales. People, I said to the University Press of Mississippi, I really want In Silence or Indifference to be the lead in the title. However you do this, subtitle is fine with me for market purposes.
I see, especially in this environment. I could see in University of Mississippi, which is, or I guess not directly. Mississippi's mentioned, but Ole Miss is not there. Shout to James Meredith. Loved it as well. Anywho, okay, so we got those two. Great background information. Now, shifting, black librarians, you include so much great information on black librarians and just black people in general who try to make an effort to get books and help black students, or black people in general sometimes, not just black children, but certainly black children need books. Just to get some of these quick snapshots of what it was like to try to be a black librarian, black educator, black person, period, trying to get books for black children in the 20th century U.S., primarily in the South in this book, but he talks, hey, anywhere at times. He writes, this is on page 48, an era of accommodation. So it's supposed to be separate but equal, wink, wink. Julius Rosenwald was amazing grace to us at that time, said a black rural North Carolina high school student in the early 1930s. It was a nice library for that time, recalled a black student at a Western North Carolina Rosenwald school in the early 1950s. We couldn't go to the public library, but we had books. Still, Rosenwald-funded efforts were not universally successful. In 1944, Carrie Robinson, mentioned, the only black employee of the Louisiana Library Commission's Service for Colored People, reported that her efforts to generate interest in library services among rural black people were stymied by the Bayou State plantation system, in quotes. Within the system, she found the black clergy, on whom she elsewhere counted for library support, were usually illiterate and do and say only what they are told by their plantation owners, who resisted her efforts. Because of this resistance, she observed, we have not reached several such parishes. And I'm skipping down just because there's so many incidents like this in the text. This is on page 36, same chapter 2. George Hunter, a black 1930s high school student in Sumter County, South Carolina, remembered his history textbook as one that the school system provided because it said that blacks were happy to be slaves, they were lazy, they weren't interested in freedom, in quotes. I even have to pause because what have you read for 13 years on this book club, Gus T? Well, one, Pitchfork Ben Tillman and the Reconstruction of White Supremacy. What did we learn there? Ben Tillman, who was going to run for president, governor of South Carolina, and they still got his statues up to this day. That's another one I point to and say, no, sir. Ain't nobody ignorant, because we finished that book. I said, what is there to brag about Ben Tillman except for racism, and specifically Ben Tillman, co-founder of Clemson University? Don't you bring no niggers here. Don't you have no niggers in school. In fact, keep all of your federal dollars if you think you're going to make us in South Carolina have some niggers in school with us. Pitchfork Ben Tillman, Catherine Massey booklet. And we read Ben Tillman's biography days after Dylan Storm roof shot up that church in Charleston. Back to South Carolina. About the abolition of slavery, their text said the Negroes were ignorant, shiftless, had no training to help them earn their living, in quotes. To counter this kind of racism, Hunter's history teacher instead recommended as supplementary reading a book about black leaders. 10 students pooled their money and bought this book, and we learned about Booker T. Washington, George Washington Carver, and all these different names were new to us. There were so many things at that time that we didn't know anything about. But when the white school superintendent found out about the recommendation, he transferred the black history teacher out of the district. Did such moves intimidate black teachers? Hunter was asked much later. Yes, very much so. And it just goes on, but capital W. Can you talk about this sort of repressive environment in Separate but Equal and just trying to get books to black children?
Sure. Well, I'll specifically look at conventional school practices at the time. Once Lyndon Johnson's Great Poverty Program was, I'll stop before then. In the early 20th century, the library profession developed a number of acquisitions guides. Many of them had the title Best Books. They would be best books for young adults, best books for adults, best books of fiction, etc. In the school library profession, there were a couple of them that developed best books, bibliographies, and then they would update them regularly. H.W. Wilson, you mentioned them previously, was heavily into this business. They would have like senior high school library catalog, and then they update it every year, and then every 5 years they bring out a new edition. Now, once the senior high school library catalog arrived on the desk of school librarians across the country, many of them would take the titles recommended in that bibliographic guide and match them against their existing collection. If there were titles in their collection that weren't in the guide, that was a subject of weeding. That's the library word for pulling them off the shelves and tossing them out. If there were titles in the guide that they didn't have on their shelves, they would tend to select those, give them highest priority in the acquisitions process. Now, over time, state departments, and I should tell you that I don't think there were any black school librarians who participated in the selection of literature for school library children or teenagers before 1950. I don't think there were any black school librarians who would have had something to say about that literature. In the first half of the 20th century, many state departments of education, and this was true for South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, Wisconsin, Washington, where you live now, Gus, New York, many state departments of education would say to the school library community in their state, well, I'll tell you what, we'll match dollar for the acquisitions guide if you select your materials from the senior high school library catalog. So already the whiteness built into the acquisition guide was that the power of the whiteness, power of persuasion of the white bibliographic acquisition guide was amplified because the school librarian knew she could buy a particular book with the assistance of State Department education funds and thus stretch her budget a little more. So if you went to the black school librarian, however, in Opelika, Alabama, for example, if she wanted to get that special book by W.E.B. Du Bois or Leroy Jones, the poetry of Leroy Jones, she would have to pay the entire price of that book, not get it with the assistance of state education department funds, because neither one of those authors would have been cited in the senior high school library catalog. So you can see how that amplifies the whiteness of the structure of the acquisitions process.
I guess 2 points. One, when you say whiteness, would that be the white supremacy racism, the system of white supremacy racism of that process? Would that be accurate?
Yes. Yes.
Awesome. Okay. And then also, because you bring this out in the book, I mean, that is important, what you just said in terms of if Carter G. Woodson, W.E.B. Du Bois, The Crisis, lost so many black newspapers. Whoa, there are so many black newspapers. The Pittsburgh Courier that Dr. Weigand references in this book, I always like to give a hat tip because, wow, these folks could have been killed going out to do all of this work at this time period. Just, wow. And he goes through and collects a lot of that material. But The Crisis and such, none of that's listed. So not only do you not get the discount, but a lot of times they had to go and pay out of pocket. Black librarians or black teachers, what I read at the beginning, Miss Mildred, you have to go and pay out of pocket to get this material. You have so many reports where we got to have a fish fry and we got to have a bake sale, and come on, don't you want your children to have books, and doing all this to scrimp and scratch and save. One, black people valuing education. There are lots of stories of that. So many stories of black people doing it, driving 70 miles to get a book. So many stories of black people putting such a value on books and education, and particularly for black children. But and if white people find out you did do all that to get that book, you could get in trouble. On page 37, the white world of school librarianship to 1954. So that'd be Brown v. Board of Education. This is a subtitle of the section, The Formation of a White Children's Literature Clerisy. In America's pre-20th century patriarchal culture, Raising children was always considered women's primary responsibility. Men have 1,000 imperative outside interests and pursuits, while nature has set her seal upon woman as the caretaker of the child, wrote the president of the National Congress of Mothers, forerunner of the PTA, in 1897. Therefore, it is natural that woman should lead in awakening mankind to the sense of the responsibilities of resting upon the race to provide each newborn soul with an environment which will foster the highest development, end quote. That she did not feel compelled to add the word white before race is telling. To better monitor this environment, at the turn of the 20th century, the nation witnessed the establishment of kindergartens, settlement houses, the Federal Children's Bureau in 1912, and new professions like social work, child psychologists, and juvenile correctional officers. I thought this was so important. One, just that one sentence where you point out where it is understood. Woman means white. As it is understood, man means white. Negroes are boys and gals, which they said even called Obama a boy repeatedly. But I thought that was so telling, and particularly on this broadcast, I pushed back for years. We do not have the man. So frequently people blame racism on white men exclusively, white male patriarchy. That is not what we have. It is white men and white women, and wow, this book includes a lot of white women. You can think back through your lives. You've seen a lot of white women in charge at the library. I think this is so important because we get into, I've asked a lot of our guests, what are some of the ways that white women specifically uphold white supremacy? This seems to be getting at one right here. Can you talk about white women's role in practicing white supremacy at the library?
Well, I have to do that historically, Gus. I would not. I'm a little reluctant to discuss school librarianship, let's say, in the 21st century. My purpose was to uncover whiteness in 20th century school library practice, and I think I accomplished that. My hope is that the nation's school library community, the nation's library community, well, the nation's school library community is 90% white still. So not knowing that they stand on the shoulders of previous generations of almost entirely white librarians should bring them pause, should cause them to reflect. And my book is an effort to get them to reflect on the profession they inherited from the 20th century. So I don't know that I want to speak to the present. I want to speak primarily to the past. And then, yes, what you said is accurate. The library practice, school library practice that the 21st century core of professionals inherited has laced through it racism. And there are elements of it that still exist, and school librarians should reflect on those elements and hopefully change them. I don't know if that answers your question, Gus, but that's about as far as I'm going to go with that.
How about 20th century, since I think that's a lot of your text, white women's role in upholding white supremacy at the school library?
Yeah. Let me use Ann Carroll Moore was the head of the children's department at the New York Public Library, and Augusta Baker was the children's librarian in the 1940s at the Harlem branch of the New York Public Library. And Ann Carroll Moore went to Augusta Baker and asked her please to keep I'm losing the title. Shame on me. Little Black Sambo. How did I forget that? Ann Carroll Moore was white, and Augusta Baker was black. And Ann Carroll Moore tried heavily to persuade Augusta Baker to please keep Little Black Sambo on the New York Public Library Harlem branch shelves. It remained in the children's catalog, which was an H.W. Wilson produced catalog that was supposed to advise children's librarians in public libraries and school librarians serving children, advised them on what books were best. Little Black Sambo, I believe, stayed in school children's catalog until well into the 1970s. So you see this pressure from a white children's literature clerisy being applied to school librarians across the country. Now, let me also say about Ann Carroll Moore in particular, because she was located in New York, and because in the early 20th century, New York's publishing industry discovered children as a new market, the New York publishing industry publishers who were interested in publishing children's books would come to Ann Carroll Moore for advice. And the advice she gave to the New York publishers was from a white middle-class woman who did not understand the world of black culture. There are a number of instances I uncovered in my research where the children's literature authors placed in the mouths of the characters, the black children's literature characters that they were creating, a dialect that Augusta Baker found offensive, but Ann Carroll Moore did not find offensive. And so many of the books that manifested that offensive dialect found their way into children's catalog and would be picked up in school libraries across the country.
Whew. Context of White Supremacy, Little Black Sambo. He has a number of those texts that are in there. Dr. Doolittle and Mary Poppins, that I think maybe we know the more sanitized versions of these and not the kind of racist white supremacist foundations of what these children's stories and such would have looked like maybe 100 years ago, 75 years ago, and such. But lots of white women responsible for keeping these texts present and such. I would say even for present, I guess I want to get to Eva Knox Evans because this would be a slight deviation from our point of white women practicing white supremacy racism. But with 21st century and current day white women at the library, it was white women who, as I told you about Negro History Month, they willfully, deliberately constructed a public display that excluded black male authors, and once they were informed about this, no, we're not changing it. This wasn't, oh, we don't know that there's a problem. And they, one, even before something was said, they acknowledged we deliberately excluded black males. And then when this is pointed out as a problem and an act of racism, they stick to it. Same pattern that I've seen before with white people. Really, that's the whole premise of the book. Integrate the schools and let the niggers in. Nah, we don't want to do that. and the major backdrop for this that I would be, so shameless if I had not said that, they have lots of reports that 60 years later, schools are worse now with so-called integration than they were 60 years ago. So, I mean, through and through, white female and male dedication to white supremacy racism, it seems flagrantly obvious to me, particularly at the library level on so many reasons. Eva Knox Evans, this is a tad later on in the book. Like I said, now, this is a deviation, and I skipped down to get this because he just mentioned that dialect. They had so many, again, for folks 2025, I think a lot of this stuff has been sanitized, in my view. A lot of times racists, they do a great job. They'll eliminate this stuff from the library and then act like it never happened, that they didn't have all this material in the library and out beloved for decades and decades and decades. People grew up with it. Generations of people grew up with all this stuff. So when it switches and you do not have black people talking with all this racist plantation dialect that is supposed to be just in, that's, how darkies talk. So when something comes along that's not that, People are like, what? What's going on? So this is chapter 2, same page 52. Eva Knox Evans, white woman. And he writes, there we go. Get back on the correct page. Okay. So he writes, the liveliest exchange about race in children's books before 1954 took place outside the library press. However, on August 30, 1941, Publishers Weekly, PW, published an article entitled The Negro in Children's Fiction by Eva Knox Evans, a white kindergarten teacher of black children attending Atlanta University's laboratory school and author of children's books, Arminita Jerome Anthony and Arminita's Goat. These are all from like mid and late 1930s. Now I'm skipping down just so I can read you some of this exchange here, which, wow, fascinating. So he writes, once published, Evans brought her books into Story Hour. It was with real pride that I showed the finished product to my small collaborators. Although she listened for murmurs of delight, they never materialized. The children only looked puzzled. Some exclaimed, Arminita is colored. Of course she's colored, Evans responded. But she doesn't talk colored. Several argued. In books, colored people say, we-uns, W-E-U-N-S, and us's, U-S-E-S, and things like that. But you don't talk that way, Evans protested. No, the children responded, we don't talk that way, but in books, colored people do. Taken aback, Evans concluded her students had been conditioned to expect dialect by a tradition in the writing of stories about Negroes, like Nights with Uncle Remus, which contained tales of kindly masters and contented slaves. But the children had been conditioned through not only the dialect, Evans realized, but also the illustrations. She described the experiences of a black children's librarian in a Midwestern city, probably Charlemagne Hill Rollins, conducting a story hour for black children. As their eyes fixed on a black child depicted on the book's front cover, one child responded, "Oh, another book making fun of us." Evans concluded her article by discussing children's books with black characters not in caricature and who did not speak in dialect. I thought that whole exchange was fascinating, but that shows why capital W for the white, if there's that level of conditioning amongst black children, these are black children, and they already have it built in how black people are supposed to speak and look in children's books. Just wow. Additional thoughts on this portion, Dr. Weigand? I'm so glad you included this in the text.
Yeah, the sad thing for me is that conversation, that set of exchanges, did not take place within the library press. So librarians were not talking about it, and that's the sad part for me. I was lucky enough to come across that because I was doing research in a database that indexed materials that weren't connected to librarianship, and so it was happenstance almost that I came across that. And that's really the shocking thing for me is how, as you read through the book, Gus, and you check through the end notes, they're all located at the end of the book. I really wish they would have been located at the foot of the page and been called footnotes. As you look at the end notes, you see very, very little quotations from library literature. Almost all those quotations that come from black newspapers that have been digitized into databases. They come from regional newspapers that carried stories about brouhahas or happenstance circumstances. For example, much of what I cover on Ernestine Denham Calvert, who lost her job in a rural Mississippi school library because she had the effrontery to go to the register of voting and try to get registered to vote. And it was covered in the Southern press, white and black, quite a bit. It was Ernestine Denham Calvert was given no room in the library press. They ignored her. Same thing with authorine Lucy Foster, who attempted to break color barrier at University of Alabama in 1956, and the student body erupted in riots that nearly killed her. She wanted to enroll in the school library program at the University of Alabama, and Thurgood Marshall served as her legal counsel through this endeavor. Pictures all over the newspapers, all over national newspapers, including the front page of the New York Times. Ernestine Lucy Foster, she married later, and she was Ernestine Lucy when this all happened, but she married and became Ernestine Lucy Foster. There was no coverage of authoring Lucy at the time all of this activity occurred in the winter and spring of 1956. I had to find that out only after reading her obituary in the New York Times, which mentioned she was a library science student. It just floored me. How could I not know about this? I've been researching American library history for half a century. How could I not know authoring Lucy? So I'll just add that in there.
And he has amazing pictures in Silence or Indifference, amazing pictures of these riots at University of Alabama. Roll Tide, Jalen Hurts rolling over in his grave. But when I looked at those photographs, it did remind me of James Meredith, even though that's not Alabama, it's Mississippi. But I mean, it looks, wow, it's so stark. But I said, wow, these people could be identified. Like, we could go get captions. They got facial recognition, and I mean, for real, these are probably somebody's, that is somebody's uncle and grandpa and grandma and all the rest of them. Like, hey, same thing I said with Ole Miss. Go through and identify all these white people. Put names on it. Who was out here trying to kill a black female just for getting educated? And it's one black female. Same thing with James Meredith. One black person sparks all this, and that's so cowardly. One black female? Cowardly. But look at those pictures. And speaking of pictures, oh my Lord, I would have killed myself, Dr. Weigand. Sometimes I'll give short shrift to the images because I'm trying to do so much. There's so much material in the books and trying to cover everything and blah, blah, blah. Just like, oh, pictures. Look at it. Man, slow down and look at the pictures. Whew. The image of the young black girls and boys at Carver High School in Arizona. It's almost 100 years old. Wow. I was stunned. I mean, just wow. Going through all, I didn't even know they had that many black people. And then, wow, the one from North Carolina, this is 1944, and they've got all these children, the librarian. Wow, it is just amazing. Check out some of the pick, but Nick, slow down. Arthur and Lucy, look at all those white people. Do they look ignorant about racism? They got lots of great pictures. They Thurgood Marshall, and they look. Make sure you scroll all the way down to, well, wait a minute, we missed Carrie Coleman Robinson in there as well. Get her, but make sure you go to Figure 8. Lock on Figure 8. Black and white high school libraries often celebrated Book Week. Here are the two early white 1960s North Carolina high school winners of a contest conducted during that week. The 10th grader on the left represents the nun from Catherine Holmes' The Nun's Story, 1956. The 11th grader on the right represents Nights with Uncle Remus stories. High school librarian, who at least to me looks like a white woman, is in the middle. My eyes might be bad. Maybe my screen is not up to date. For the life of me, it looks like this white student is in blackface in this photograph, Figure 8. Is that what I'm looking at here, Dr. Weigand?
That is what you're looking at.
Is there additional background on this here figure 8?
I pulled that photograph out of an album that's at the North Carolina State Archives. I came across it, and I reacted so I had to get up and walk around. In librarianship in general, and library history in particular, we like to celebrate predecessors who overcame obstacles. And so the Augusta Bakers of our history, the Carrie Coleman Robinsons, the Charlemagne Hill Rollins, we do celebrate them in our literature because they overcame. They're all black women, black librarians who overcame significant obstacles. But what we don't do in our profession is stop and say, what were the obstacles that those black librarians met? And it is white librarianship. And so you see in that photograph, for example, a white school librarian, perhaps not blessing the black-faced student who won the Uncle Remus Award, but certainly tolerating it and smiling at it. So that's the comment I'll make on that particular photo.
You said perhaps not blessing the blackface performance for the Uncle Remus Award, the white librarian. You said perhaps not blessing.
I can't crawl into her mind, Gus. It looks to me like this whole situation is okay to her, and that's the message I would like the readers of the book to take away from it. That is the situation in which that librarian worked.
I mean, this is the obstacle. I do appreciate that isn't the practice of white supremacy racism. But you said in the caption here, black, and did you write the caption for figure 8? These are your words?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they are my words.
Okay. Black and white high school libraries often celebrated Book Week. They are. Is this what this is? This is a part of the celebration for Book Week here?
Yes.
Okay. She's not just like up there tacitly, I'm so embarrassed and disgraced in this 1960s. That's not. She has the biggest smile in the world, and she is not touching this white girl in the nun's costume. She doesn't have a hand. She's not stroking her, patting her on the back. She is actually holding on to the book with Uncle Remus, this white fella in blackface. Am I looking at that correctly?
You are looking at it correctly.
Okay. That, I mean, no, I can't crawl into her cerebrum and spell it. Oh, okay, she sent, I'm in total. But I mean, wow, you cannot smile much wider than that. I don't know what she looked like if she's married. I don't know if she has children, but I mean, show those pearly whites. And she's touching him. It's not even just, stand over there, man. Stand over there. This is just great. My children are going to see this. And that's not it at all. Whoop it, congratulate Uncle Remus. Woo! And for context now, I told you about those racist jokes. He said 100. White people have a very, very, very long history of celebrating blackface performance. We got a whole book on that. This happening at the White House years after what was depicted right here in the 60s. President Nixon and the most powerful white people in the world sitting around doing the exact same thing. That's how the book Nixon's Piano begins. Blackface, and this had been going on for decades too. Anyway, am I lying to your knowledge? Did anything I just said, am I being inaccurate? I'm talking to a historian.
No. It's just a historian is reluctant to interpret photographic material in a particular way. I understand completely how you would come away from that photograph, but professionally I feel somewhat constrained at interpreting a particular photograph in a particular way. I hope my readers interpret it like you do. I'm just sort of professionally constrained from being too descriptive in a particular direction.
Man, Uncle Remus, we got 1,000, and it's the smile, man. If it's 1,000 words, I'm gonna tell you the truth, Dr. Weigand. The blackface is 500. That smile is 500 of that 1,000 words here. Like, if she was glum or sad or whatever, it would be that smile. Whew, man, you all don't even have to read the book. Just click to the pictures, look for picture 8, and look at that smile. Like, wow. and that's not even the only smile. Now look over, because he did us a solid, including this one. Much obliged, Dr. Weigand. Look to the far right of that picture, behind Uncle Remus. You got another beaming white face. She also does not look like, whoa. What's going on here? I am progressive. I am not racist. Don't be putting me. You've had a lot of black people who've spoken up at this point, like Amos and Wilson. Amos and Andy has been taken off the air at this point, so at least there's some knowledge that some people don't think this is cool. Maybe at least we don't do this for the book week celebration. No. Pearly whites. And this probably another educator, might be another library staff, I don't know, educator, principal, who knows. Any hoodles. And do not miss those images from the terrorists where they burn NAACP literature on the county courthouse steps. Say that again. They burn NAACP literature on the county courthouse steps because one black female wants to go to school, be a librarian. Authoring Lucy. That's what I said, white. Excuse me. Well, yeah, Women's History Month. Authoring Lucy. Wow. Okay, let me roll back. Got forward in the book. Scroll back a little bit. I'll check and make sure I didn't miss our folks who dialed in with a question. Another one, even to the ignorance point. You mentioned, and it's super important, the number of books that are not included. Carter G. Woodson, Miseducation of the Negro. He wrote a lot of books as well, but we're not going to list that. We're not going to include that. The libraries. Black newspapers, Ebony, and all that from that time period. The material that does get included, like Dr. Dolittle, Mary Poppins, Uncle Remus, like all of this sort of material, and some of the material that we've heard before. You include, and we'll take it for what it's worth, they do exclude some of Thomas Dixon's novels and such that romanticize the Klan, include Birth of a Nation based on the Klansman. They do exclude that from the big list. But the 1912 to 1921 edition did, however, cite Madison Grant's bestseller, The Passing of the Great Race. Grant was a eugenicist who promoted the concept of white race purity. In passing, he crafted a hereditary history that identified a Nordic race of blue-eyed, fair-haired peoples of the north of Europe, being genetically superior to the Alpine race that consisted of dark-haired, dark-eyed people. This latter group, when combined with swarms of Jews and an increasing number of half-breeds, threatened American democracy, he argued, because democracy is fatal to progress when two races of unequal value live side by side. The catalog annotation read, European history from viewpoint of racial origins with consideration of biological teachings based on theory that Nordics are now in control but losing ground by deterioration, in quotes. This is one that I kind of point to like, no, I don't think these white librarians are ignorant, particularly when you have books like this that make sure to let you know this is what things are about. This is a really important book that did get listed, yes?
Yes. Let me just push back a little on that, Gus. libraries are not compulsory institutions. They have to answer to the desires of their communities. So, for example, if Donald Trump should publish a polished autobiography that includes a cajillion lies, there will be MAGA folks at the local public library who will say to the librarian, you need to have this book. And so I would argue that a reason, not the reason, but a reason that Madison Grant book was placed in that bibliography was because there were enough people who bought into what he said that the librarian felt it was in her best interest to include that book among the array of titles. So there's that pressure that the librarian has to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Not necessarily that it reflects the librarian's idea. It reflects what may be part of the ideological makeup of the community that she is serving.
I was going to point to a lot of things, but just because of that last portion that what you said, it's not like these white librarians, they go out to a different county or a different state. They are a part of the capital W white community. They go home to white children and white husbands and white grandfathers and white grandmothers and all the rest of it. Why would I think their views are any different than the white people they allegedly serve?
Because there are there are white women whose voices would not agree with Madison Grant. I'll point you to one, Ernestine Rose, white librarian who was the first librarian to be placed at the head of the Harlem branch, which is now the Schomburg Center of the New York Public Library. She went with a black librarian and got the NAACP in 1925 to protest Carnegie Foundation and the American Library Association's endorsement of establishing a black library school. Ernestine Rose and the NAACP wanted the white library schools simply to open up their enrollments to black students. Ernestine has a history of being not racist. I would point you and your audience to a film, a documentary that's coming out. PBS will be playing it on April 29th, called Free for All, the American Public Library. And in it, the documentarians will focus on Ernestine Rose and several black librarians, and you'll see that there are white female librarians who were not racist in the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s, but who still may have felt compelled to provide the Madison Grant book because that's what their clientele wanted.
That's fascinating on a number of levels. Ernestine Rose is in the book one time. You said that Ernestine Rose, she fought to get black people access to libraries in Harlem. Does she have anything else on her ledger that qualifies her as a white person who was not racist definitively?
I don't understand your question. Can you rephrase that?
Is there any other evidence, like if you had to submit evidence, Ernestine Rose never...
Oh, yeah, okay. She hired the first African-American librarian in the New York Public Library system. She fought the American Library Association in helping to establish a black library school. She helped organize the first round table that focused on black people in the American Library Association in the early 1920s. It only lasted 2 years because a bunch of white librarians who didn't want to talk about issues of race in librarianship. She befriended African Americans. She told all of her librarians who worked under her in the New York Public Library system to go out to their communities and see what their communities wanted. Well, New York City in the 1920s was, of course, a very cosmopolitan city. It had Chinese Americans, it had Japanese Americans, it had African Americans, it had European Jews had a heavy population in New York City. So she deliberately told her subordinates to go find out what those people wanted and needed, which was unusual among the library profession at large. There are other indications, several other examples that emulate Ernestine Rose's professional practice, and they were white female librarians. So I can't make a categorical statement about all white librarians being racist. It just doesn't apply. There's too much historical evidence to suggest otherwise. Not large numbers, but some numbers.
I'm just pointing out, you could let me know if there's anything wrong, but I'm trying to use logic. So we had the white woman with beaming, showing every tooth and her head and her tonsils, standing next to a white child in blackface. Dr. Weigand said, now, whoa, I can't get in her head to say, if she's praising or celebrating, and I don't know what she's thinking. Now we get this white woman who has she organized a talk, she befriended allegedly some black people and organized a roundtable for 2 years. He can say definitively she was not racist. Presumably you cannot get in her head either, Ernestine Rose, to know, now really, did she believe in the system of white supremacy racism or not? I'm just pointing that. Okay.
No, she did not.
And see, he's still doing it as though have you looked in her head? Did you do that procedure? You were able to get in her brain computer to see what she was thinking?
Well, I have another book that you haven't mentioned yet that I wrote with my wife, Cheryl, The Desegregation of Public Libraries in the Jim Crow South, where I talk about Ernestine Rose in more detail than I do in Silence or Indifference.
I'm going to ask my question again.
Did
you get inside? Hang on.
Okay.
Did you get inside Ernestine Rose's head? Because that's what you said previously when talking about the white librarian. You couldn't say whether or not she was racist or celebrating Uncle Remus, blackface. Did you get inside Ernestine Rose's head?
No.
To see? Okay. I'm just pointing that out for listeners. He can draw a conclusion to say this white person is not racist, not knowing what they're thinking. He cannot do that for a white person standing next to a white person in blackface, Uncle Remus in the 60s. Anywho.
Okay, I'm going to push back a little bit.
Hang on, because I want to bring in, because you wrote about this in the text. You wrote about this in the text about other white women who are allegedly not racist. So I'm going to add to Ernestine Rose, because you didn't even say too much about her in this specific book. This is on page 89, From Brown to Little Rock. You write, reasons for this silence, talking about white people, may be traceable to the fact that white school librarians from Jim Crow states occupied many American Association of School Library offices before 1974. Before Brown, many AASL white school library leaders had come from the Jim Crow South. All had observed firsthand the effects of Jim Crow laws, which would mean they are not ignorant. All had participated, willingly or not, in its practices. In 1954, a white Texas school, now that right there, if we all participated in the practices, unless I misread that. That's what it looks like it says, though. In 1954, a white Texas school librarian was president. The vice president was a white South Carolina state school library supervisor, and the treasurer, another Texas school librarian. 4 others from Jim Crow states served on the executive board and council. Were any of these white Southern school library leaders racist? Question. The historical record clearly shows some were. For more than 20 years before she retired in 1968, Lucille Nix, for example, had responsibility for supervising public school library work in Georgia. Popular in the South, she seemed destined for the high office in ALA. Unfortunately, however, Nix was unable to abandon the conservative credo of segregated interracial cooperation. Her biographer, James V. Carmichael Jr., writes, like many white Southerners of her generation, she could not understand the cultural biases inherent in a system dominated by one race and perhaps accepted as inevitable the fact that separate facilities would necessarily be unequal. Despite her racism, however, ALA gave Nix its prestigious Joseph W. Lippincott Award in 1968 for distinguished service to librarianship several months after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. One wonders what went through the minds of Virginia Lacey Jones and other black Georgia librarians as Nix accepted the award. That's fascinating because I did have a passage due marked for white people that are not racist. Not this one, but wow, this is even better because of the passage that I highlighted. What I said at the top, they all participated. Is that true? Did I read that correctly? That they all had participated willingly or not in its practices. Is that what you wrote, Dr. Weigand?
I wrote that, yeah.
Okay. You want to give?
I'm not arguing with that.
Okay.
For me, if you say nothing, you are participating. It's the old Desmond Tutu saying, if you see injustice and say nothing, you're helping the injustice.
Is it possible for an individual to be classified as white in a system of white supremacy racism and to not participate in practicing racism? Is that possible?
Are you asking me in 2025, is that possible? Or are you asking me about people who lived in 1974?
At any time that the system of white supremacy racism exists, is it possible to be classified as white and not participate in practicing racism, white supremacy at any time?
Yes.
How would you?
Yes, I believe it is possible.
How would you?
I'm sorry?
I said, how would that white person do so? What would that white person be required to do to not practice that white supremacy racism at any time?
I'm a white guy. I definitely have benefited from white supremacy during my entire career. I'm trying to point out in books that I write about American library history where that has helped me. So am I participating in white supremacy? I don't understand how I could by trying to point out where are its flaws in my research and writing.
From a white person who grew up in a sundown town and then went on to do all this academically taught. Matter of fact, let me connect this. You said you've done all these decades of library scholarship and training folks for this, getting training yourself. What are the demographics? You told us it's 90% white. What are the demographics of people that have come to take your emeritus now? What are the demographics of the folks who've come through to take your classes over the year? Is it the same 90% white?
I would say yes, that is true.
Is that you practicing white supremacy racism there?
How I don't understand how you can say that. I'm a white guy employed by a university that's largely white and has students who are largely white. Just by being there, am I practicing white supremacy?
I mean, given the work that you've done and what would that be, decades, if not centuries of labor that people classified as white have deliberately put in to make sure that we don't have white people at institutions like that, and particularly for fields like that, to be a librarian? I'm just asking. I mean, if you don't think so, you can, give us your response. I'm just asking.
Yeah. So here's kind of my response. I have been teaching about black librarians in universities that are accredited by the American Library Association for at least 25 years when I started picking up black history. So the students, I can't go out and recruit a lot of black students. If black students don't come to library school, in part because the library profession doesn't pay as much as other professions. I suspect that's one of the reasons. But if I teach white students about the black history in American library history, I think I'm pointing to some of the warts in American library history more than the halos. And that's what I see as a service. I don't see how that fits into the world of white supremacy and perpetuate it. I'm trying to point out that there is this group of people who are segregated by race and have been treated unfairly in American library history, which most of my fellow professionals do not recognize.
Facts. I will point out for our non-white listeners, victims of white supremacy, we got that F word fair, very important in Mr. Fuller's word guide, and the B word benefits. I pointed this out for the duration of our 16 years on the air, that speaking to people classified as white, like Dr. Weigand, you can find oodles, boodles of individuals classified as white all over the known universe. And with Elon Musk, they might be out in Mars, who knows, who can talk to you about all of the privileges and benefits that they get from the system of white supremacy. When we got all that Band-Aids, yum yum, how do you practice white supremacy racism? It's very similar to when I ask, you've heard all these billions of racist jokes, can you share one? It's the same response, and I find both of those very suspicious. We have a system of white supremacy racism, but it's very hard to find white people who practice racism. Any hoodles. Specifically, before I nab a caller, Juliet, that's it. I told you I did have it. I didn't lie. In my view, I didn't even misread, because he did say they all participate. Well, in fact, I have to rewind one more time before I get to Juliet Moore. Man, J. Strom Thurmond is mentioned in this book. Book club again, man. Gus T., what you been doing for 13 years, the Catherine Massey Book Club? We read Essie Mae Washington Williams, Dear Senator, J. Strom Thurmond. One of the reasons that the indifference, the white ignorance, implicit bias, even you saying that you as a white man do not participate in the system of white supremacy racism, people classified as white lie so much. And I mean, they lie and 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 then lie some more. Now, when you gave Ernestine Rose, white woman who you say definitively, you didn't get in her brain, but you know she is for sure, all time's sake, not a racist. And you list out, this is what she did. She befriended a black person. She organized a round table that was held for 2 years, sabotaged by the racist whites, but whatever. She hired black people. All of these things, spoke out to get black people access to libraries. That's where he started all this about. And he said he wrote a whole book about Miss Rose, who's not racist. J. Strom Thurmond, white man, had sexual intercourse with a black female and produced a child. He still practiced white supremacy racism, and the most despicable of it all, I guess it's 1A, 1B, 1A, is he raped a child. He hired black people too, but he raped a child. Produced offspring with this black child who worked for him, and then went out for decades. Stay away from the negro. Don't sleep with the negro. Oh my God. He got that in his book. All these, oh my God, these niggers are coming to the library. These black bucks, and oh, they're going to rape our daughters. And he got the one in Mississippi. Oh my goodness, my little white angel. She went to school with a halo. She went to school, and they sat her between these two buck niggers, and oh my God, I put her in private school the next day. You got all of that. J. Strom Thurmond raped a black female, and that's a big pattern. As in fact, when he mentioned James Chaney and those 2 white boys getting killed in Mississippi in 1964? The same white fella that wrote Nixon's Piano, he wrote Racial Matters. He was a guest on our program 3 times. He told us a part of how the FBI cracked that case in Mississippi, Freedom Summer, they went and pressured the white sheriff and said, look here, we're going to tell these townspeople that you've been raping these black females and see what they think about that, sheriff. Now, where are the bodies to James Chaney and those 2 white boys? He wrote, got the FBI footnotes and everything, and he told us that was a big pattern amongst white sheriffs. Shout out to the Goon Squad. That's the type of thing that I point out, that there's so much lying amongst white people. I don't even think he included that in the text about J. Strom Thurmond raping and having children with a black person. And I point this out all the time when people bring him up, the hypocrisy and the lying of all of this, which really gets at the core, because it's not even about staying away from black people. If that were the case, why are you raping a black person? I guess I'll slow down. One, you're a historian and a scholar, Dr. Weigand. Were you aware J. Strom Thurmond produced child with a black person, raped this black child in South Carolina?
Yes.
Yes, that didn't get included in the book. What, did you not think that was relevant, since so many people make that lame lie of an argument, so many white people, W capital, that we got to stay away from the Negroes, even though they're doing the J. Strom Thurmond raping black children? This goes all the way back to the plantation. Yes, isn't that true?
What does this have to do with school library history?
Because you include in the book, let me slow it down, do you include in the book stories of multiple white people, including J. Strom Thurmond, saying we can't have these black children in our schools and or libraries because they will rape our white girls and will want to marry them? Is that true?
Yes, that is in the book.
Okay. And even we got to put our white children in private schools and gut public education, because they'll be sitting next to a black buck or 2 black bucks in school, and they might rape them. Do you include that in the book?
I certainly do.
Okay. Do you see some sort of massive lie if you've got lots of white people who are saying this, and then some of the same exact white people, J. Strom Thurmond, they're turning around and raping black females? Do you see some sort of lie or hypocrisy, or at least something deserves to be explained, do you think?
Absolutely.
Do you have a thought on that hypocrisy, since you said you were aware that J. Strom Thurmond did this and you write about him in the book? Do you have a thought on that hypocrisy? Why would he be coming out saying don't sleep with the niggers when he sleeps with the niggers?
When I sent the book into the University Press of Mississippi, I had about 150,000 words. They said to me, if you want to sell this book, you're going to have to cut it down to 90,000. So about 60,000 words ended up on the editing floor, and I had to make decisions about what to address and what not to address. I chose not to address Strom Thurmond's illegitimate child. I didn't see that it played directly into the story I was trying to tell.
Have you read Dear Senator, S.E.M. Washington Williams' book, his Offspring?
No, I have not read that.
Okay. It is amazing. And in fact, it dovetails with your book, because he has this long, Strom Thurmond I'm talking about, he has this long conversation with her that, oh my goodness, and you're my child and all that, it might be better for me to ship you off to an HBCU in South Carolina. I can hide you out there. And they incorporate this long history of white men in South Carolina and other places in the South shipping off their illiterate non-white offspring to these HBCUs, even though they're fighting tooth and she talks to him about this. She talks to him about this. How can you be coming out and saying all this about us and depriving us of education? And hello, I'm your daughter, even though you raped the child to produce me. And he does a whole lot of hemming and hawing. Well, I got to get elected. That needs to be highlighted. I mean, particularly because this is well known. This is in like the newspaper. They got books about this and all this. Like highlight, and it's widespread hypocrisy, because it wasn't just J. Strom Thurmond doing this. I will give, before I nab one of our callers, Juliet Moore, because I did mention her. Juliet more white woman, not racist, maybe. we'll say maybe. I have my suspicions, but and this is another one where he got a huge assist, I'll say, from the black press, the Pittsburgh Courier. They have a massive story. I was able to go and get it immediately. I checked the footnotes. This is another book. Check the footnotes. Gosh, it's kind of an ode to a lot of black newspapers and publications from that time period. But I mean, wow, it is a treasure trove of information. But the black press, I went and got the Pittsburgh Courier's report on Juliet Moore. I think it's 1958, if my memory is accurate. And wow, go all and download it. If y'all can go access at your library online or whatever it is. This is on page 91, From Brown to Little Rock. Make sure I can pick up the correct chapter. Existing in the Workplace Environment. This is the subheading. Any white Southern librarians who dared to publicly criticize Jim Crow suffered consequences. 11 days after Rosa Parks was arrested, for listeners in 1955, just talked about that. People talking erroneously, saying the Montgomery bus boycott was in 1958. Wrong. Montgomery Public Library references librarian Juliet Morgan, for example, wrote the local white newspaper about the harsh treatment she had observed white bus drivers accord black riders. 3 times I have gotten off the bus because I could not countenance treatment of Negroes. Twice I have heard a certain driver with high seniority mutter audibly, "black ape." For this letter, Morgan paid a high price. Segregationists called her at the library. They called her at her home, where she lived, alone with her mother. They threatened her. They harassed her. They insulted her with vulgar and obscene accusations, noted a black weekly, Pittsburgh Courier, columnist. Stress became so great that she took a leave of absence, but she could not sleep. She could not eat. On the morning of July 17, her mother found her dead, an empty bottle of pills by her bedside with a note that read, "I'm not going to cause any more trouble to anybody." Plain murder, the Pittsburgh Courier columnist called it. When I look, I didn't know anything about Juliet Moore, Dr. Weigand, but when I read this, I went to go look. I said, I got the Pittsburgh Courier report. They have all kinds of articles, and they've done recent reports acknowledging what happened here and talking about her and saying she's one of the victims in all the civil rights movement. I had never heard of any of this at all. I guess, how did you find this portion? And one, let's make sure she is not indicative of most white women of this time period. Is that true?
Well, let me answer the question where I found out about it. In the book, The Desegregation of Public Libraries in the Jim Crow South, that's where my wife and I first came across this incident. I'd also tell you that the Montgomery Public Library's main building is named after her right now. So they recognized this part of their past. Now, is Juliet more indicative of most white Southern library? That was a public library, bear in mind, not a school library. Is she indicative of most white Southern women? No, not at all. I think most white Southern women were either racist or cowered before the pressures that Juliet experienced before she committed suicide.
I even compared this with the treatment that I've read some of it already, but the treatment that you described that black teachers and black librarians, certain Medgar Evers, who was neither, but faced during this time period. And man, this is on page 99 of your text. Dr. Wiegand, he writes, for its December 2nd, 1956 issue, Life magazine interviewed black teacher Allie Lee Causey of Shady Grove, Alabama, and quoted her as saying, "Integration is the only way through which Negroes will receive justice on our jobs and equal pay, and then we'll be able to afford better homes and good education." Local white reaction was immediate and forceful. Her white school board fired her, and her husband also lost his job. It's burrheads like him said a white influential county matron, that are causing us trouble. We ought to ship every one of them back to Africa. Another Louisiana school removed all copies of the Life magazine that carried the article from its library. And then not just her husband got to go to, fired. And he talks about that. It was widespread white domination and terrorism. The bank is white. Your job is white. The transportation is white. Everything, anything that you might need, post office, all that, going to vote, white domination, white power. You had better not act like you want to go and meddle with our library affairs or anything else for that matter. Shh. Wow, to be a black person in this era and trying to just get books, not even talking about going and being a civil rights activist and protesting and boycotting and just getting books for black children. We don't take up Dr. Weigand's entire evening, but that passage, this is on page, so really the entire book to a degree. I guess before I even get to that, because I talked about it in the email, and man, what has been, you said you kind of wrote this for the library establishment, which is 90% white. How have they received?
Oh, no, I didn't say why am I laughing? I have written to the editors of the major school library journals and the editors of the major library periodicals that the book was forthcoming, and would they like to write an essay on it. I wrote them again after the book was published and invited them to do the same thing. There has been, and I kid you not, silence and indifference towards the subject of the book. I have written to presidents of the American Library Association and the presidents of the American Association of School Librarians, and there was only one person who even responded to me. So I would have to say, Gus, that the book, I told people in advance that it was coming out so that they were forewarned, and I told people after it came out. In fact, we deliberately had it published a week before Banned Books Week because it's such a contrast to the portrait the library community likes to paint of itself regarding banned books. And it was literally and it was ignored during Banned Books Week, and it's pretty much been ignored since. The only review I'm aware of right now is by a Rare Books periodical in Chicago, and it was reviewed by Bob Wedgeworth, who is the American Library Association's first black executive director. He served from 1973 to, I think, like 1989 or something like that. But that's it. That's the reaction I've been getting.
Was I in error? Because I said I know you said that you would like the general public and everyone to be able to read the book, but you were hoping that fellow library scholars would read this text. Is that in error? Is that that's not what you told us?
No, I wrote it primarily to acquaint librarians with a sad chapter in their history, and it's one that they need to read and reflect upon. I'll give you another example, Gus. Most professions have established commissions on racism that then analyze the history of those professions. I recommended to the American Library Association in 2017, 28, as I was doing research on this book, establish a commission on racism to take a look at your history. I never got any response to that. So I would say that because I read a lot of professional histories, I would say that the library profession is about as ignorant about its history as any other profession I've ever had contact with.
Fascinating. He said it was the black male. Is it Mr. Woodard who the only person that you're aware of, first black president?
Bob Wedgeworth.
Wedgeworth, thank you.
The executive director of the American Library Association.
Wedgeworth, thank you. Bob Wedgeworth, executive director, thank you.
Right.
He's the, that is, although I'm not surprised, but wow.
He was the first. He was the first, not necessarily the only. He was the first black executive director of the American Library Association.
Right on for Mr. Wedgeworth. I'm going to have to go read his review, see what he had to say about the tech. In my view, that ongoing, as you say, silence and indifference, that is just further willful at this too. And in this environment, because this is connected with my question, in this environment, even what you requested, you talking about getting some sort of committee that's supposed to address race, and in this, man, they would DEI all of that, like, and this book, like all that. Get out of here, all that. Like we are done with all that. Maybe you can wait and see what happens for the next presidential election, but at least for the time being, like, oh no, we're not doing any of that. We're not reading this at school. We're not buying this at school. We're not going to put this in the library. None of the above. That's why I say it reminded me on page 113 when you wrote "The South tells us what to use in books." Until 1964, Louisiana had no black people employed as staff members in the State Department of Education. Department textbooks committees divided by subject and grade level routinely recommended 5 or more textbooks for adoption to the state superintendent, who then made recommendations to the State Board of Education. When I read that in the context of this book, and then our current president is talking about abolishing the Department of Education, it kind of put things on a continuum with what you talk about. And even what I said before, we are going to private school. Forget all this public education. If you all are going to come in and we got to read Carter G. Woodson and have my daughter sitting next to these Negroes, private school. In fact, forget all the public. We don't even want, which is Pitchfork and Tillman had expressed similar sentiments. Do you see, is this kind of on a similar trajectory with some of the same influence in terms of the current talk about abolishing the Department of Education?
Right. I see this coming. And my knowledge of history, of course, makes me fear. Here we go again.
Fascinating. We shall see. Let's see. Making sure I didn't miss any folks who had questions. Let's see. Double checking. Seeing that they had a *61 if you have anything before we let Dr. Weigand enjoy the rest of his evening. Before we encourage folks to go at minimum, look at that picture of the blackface in the text. We've asked a number of our guests who they think is most informed about white supremacy, racism in terms of the dynamics, how it works, the daily operation, the scaffolding responsible for who gets books in the library. Do you think individuals classified as white, like yourself, do you think they are more informed about what racism is and how it works, or do you think non-white people are more informed?
Oh, non-white people are more informed about racism and how it works.
What, I guess, what evidence? How do you come to that conclusion?
Just I'm a historian, okay? So I study history, and I learned more about the subject I wrote in Silence or Indifference from black voices than I did from white voices.
Fascinating. You are informed about racism, and you are classified as white, yes?
Yeah.
I'm processing. If we were talking about the plantation, do you think the slaves are more informed about the plantation or the slave masters?
I don't know how to answer that question. The slave masters know how to be slave masters and run a plantation. The slaves know how to be slaves and are being told what to do on the plantation. So I don't know what is being informed in that circumstance.
The same context in terms of informed that I just gave. The daily operations. How does racism work? how does the plantation work in terms of the shackles? How do we get all of this? How do we get the slave quarters built? When does the food come? When do we sell the niggers? Same thing I said about racism. Who is more informed about what that process is and how it works? Would it be the slaves or the slave masters?
I'm going to avoid answering that question because the question itself confuses me, and I worry about giving an answer that doesn't address. It just confuses me. I don't understand I don't understand the question.
That's interesting. If we made it more modern, who do you think is more informed about the prison system? The inmates or the guards? And again, same thing I said. What all of this is in terms of the prison.
You're dealing with two different perspectives. The guards have a perspective and the prisoners have a perspective.
But I gave you the perspective, Dr. Weekend. Hang on a second, because you're being slick now. I gave you the perspective. I told you this is not what it feels like to be in prison. That's not what this is. I said specifically, this is how does all of this work? What makes the prison run? When does the laundry come? How do we organize the cells, the air ducts? How do we get the food deliveries? Because that's what I said for the plantation. The clothes delivery, the laundry, the light bulbs.
I think I'm beginning to understand the gist of your question. Under that circumstance, of course, it's the prison guards, the prison warden, the state structure, the federal structure that imposes restrictions on the prisoners.
Okay. That's my understanding too.
And I'd say the same. Yeah, I'd say the same thing about plantation owners.
That would be my understanding too. In fact, just the logic, it would be kind of difficult to maintain a prison or a plantation if the prisoners, slaves, were more informed about this operation than the guards or the plantation owners. Might be kind of dangerous to try to control these people if they were that informed. Yeah. That's the same logic that I use when we talk about who's more informed about racism. Any hoodles.
But I would learn a lot about the experiences of black school librarians between 1954 and 1974 who suffered at the expense of white superiority. I would learn a lot more about their lives through their voices than I would through the white voices that are controlling them.
I learned a lot from the black voices too, and white people do study non-white people. That is true, absolutely, and yes, I learned a lot from Charlamagne Hill Rollins, Carrie Coleman Robinson, Polly Ann Myers, Authorin Lucy, Ernestine Denham Talbert. I'm sure you could learn a lot from all, and Women's History Month, man. Make time, go, if you just pick one of those names, go do some research, do some digging. It's not White Women's History Month. Pick out some of these black female librarians who are trying to encourage us to read. You could learn a teaspoon, but woo, the experts on racism classified as white. We have been chatting it up. It has been a hoot. The book In Silence or Indifference. Give out the full title because that is important. In Silence or Indifference, Racism and Jim Crow Segregated Public School Libraries. Wow, I learned so much reading this book. Man, as someone who does try to read a lot, it inspired me to read even more. And have so much gratitude for the folks who, Dr. Welsing and many others who have been encouraging us to read and making extraordinary sacrifices, even putting their life on the line in many instances to get black people books. So thank you so much for writing the book. I guess you didn't write it for black people specifically, but wow, I think a lot of black people could learn a lot from this book. And thank you for putting in that photo of the blackface. Man, if nothing, I learned a lot, but that photo,
yeah. All right.
Bravo, Dr. Wiegand, bravo.
Okay. Gus, can I say one more thing?
Sure.
Okay. I would encourage your listeners to go to their local public library and their local school library and say, why don't you have this book? I don't know any other way to get people to become aware of the subject matter about which I wrote. Why don't you have this book? Now, I don't even care that much about sales. I'm much more interested in getting my profession to engage in a discussion about the conclusions and the research findings. That was my major goal.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Dang, Dr. Weigand, I have encouraged black people for about a year since the white women at the library excluded black male authors. I started saying, make that an act against racism. Go to your library and request a book that's about racism or a book that you think would be constructive that they don't have. Go and request that they get it, because most likely you're going to have to talk to a white woman. Not always, but hey, somebody white, probably female. And that might be your battle against racism right there, getting that book in the library. What? This is a constructive book. And even the way that the cover looks, because it looks like a book. If you see it, it looks like the old school book with a library. People don't even have those anymore, but the old school books that you could go and check out and they would stamp and all that. If you're crotchety and old enough, as he said, geezers will remember all that. But man, see if they would. He said, in a question, why don't you have this book?
And by the way, the first date on that book card is Brown versus the Board of Education decision.
I caught that, 1954. I caught that, yes, very important. I think 63 is on there importantly. Kennedy, that's a big year for the book. Kennedy assassination and March on Washington and bombing of the... Oh, and 70, it's September 63, bombing of the Birmingham church. That's a couple of weeks after the March on Washington, August 28, 1963. Yes, I did catch you have some very important dates on the front book flap for In Silence, or in one of the better books that I have read in some time. Like, wow, chock full of info.
Thank you for the compliment, Gus.
Well earned. Well earned. I'm a little stingy with my book compliments, but I put a lot of highlights in this one and I learned quite a bit. So job well done, Dr. Weigand. We will keep an eye out for future public. I'm going to ask. I will do that just to see what happens, just for giggles. I will go to the library and ask, or yes, why don't you have this book? And I'll drop you an email to see what they say. Maybe they'll get it, or, maybe they'll throw me out of the library, but I will ask and let you know.
All right. Thank you.
Much obliged, Dr. Weigand. Context of White Supremacy, Dr. Wayne A. Weigand, library scholar, historian, author of In Silence or Indifference, chatting it up with us this evening on the Cows. Much obliged. Have a great evening and keep up the great work, sir.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Gus. I enjoyed it a lot.
I did as well. We will talk, sir. Evening.
Bye-bye.
Dr. Wayne A. Weigand, Context of White Supremacy. What a great book. And you all know buddy. I do not, let's not waste time, texts and all of that nonsense, but wow, I learned so much. If anything, if I could boil it down to one thing, the anecdote that I started with, black judge and black female librarian, and that inspired him to be a judge. I want to go back and make sure I put names on everybody. I moved off the page in the text where that is, just so I can go back and properly identify everybody. And, oh man, I could be lazy about this. I totally forgot. This was on StoryCorps. If people don't know what StoryCorps is, so compensatory call-in, right? I play audio segments every Saturday, news reports, last 7 days, all that. I have done that for years. They have a segment, and I think it's on Friday, where they do, like, it'll be like a family type of a thing, attempted family. It'll be like maybe siblings talking, or a child talking to their parent or grandparent or something like that, but talking about some sort of story about their family. And they've had a number of these about racism, quite a few. I think they might have even talked to some of the children who so-called integrated schools in like the 50s and 60s. Anyway, I played a number of these over the years. The anecdote that Dr. Weigand, that he referenced, where this young black boy in Arkansas becomes the first judge, and I think it was in Miss Mildred, she had been traveling all the way to Memphis doing a 70-mile trek to get these books. That was on StoryCorps, so I'll play that so we can hear this. But I mean, wow. Just realizing, yes, it is true. Black people, at least in the U.S., this part of the world, we do not have a culture of being serious scholars and reading. Certainly, that is not true for every single person classified as black. We got non-Clemson dad valedictorian. But wow, that is not widespread. We have lots of Netflixing and streaming and TV watching, and I'm not going to read. Black bookstores closing and such, white people most to blame. But I mean, hey, lots of reasons. The end result, you got lots and lots of people classified as black who do not read. Don't even read Fuller's book, Dr. Welsing's book, you know? White people have that right there. Anybody out there, if you listen to this program, you know non-white people, black people specifically, who do not read. I'm not trying to read. I don't do no reading. Get away. Coming around with no book, medical apartheid. That's a big one, too. I don't know. Get away from me. Code book. Get away from me. I don't want to read it. Get it. ISIS paper. Get away. The man, I don't care who read. White people have successfully conditioned us for this to be the result. And this conditioning has been going on for centuries for that to be the result. That's how we should think about it. When Dr. Welsing says reading is more important than watching television, working against racism every time you flip a page, every time you pick up a book, I'm working against racism. I'm exercising my brain computer. I'm looking for information to solve the problem. Replace white supremacy with justice. I'm turning off that television just a little while. I didn't even say you got to cancel every streaming subscription, never watch YouTube again. I didn't even say that. Now, I did say if you're going to have offspring, you should get rid of that TV. I did say that. You can still watch on your phone, screen, whatever, put it in your room. But, man, you should not have television where you got offspring. They just go veg in front of that screen hours at a time. Like, come on. Come on. Reading is more important than watching television. This, in my view, he became a judge.
It is a Friday morning, which is when we hear from our program StoryCorps, which is traveling the country, recording Americans as they share stories about their lives. Today we're going to hear how a teenage boy fell in love with books. Ollie Neal grew up in Arkansas during the 50s. Didn't care much for high school, and one day he cut class and wandered to the library. We're going to hear now as he tells his daughter what happened when he stumbled onto a book written by African-American author Frank Yerby.
I was a rather troubled high school senior at the time, about 16 years old, and I spotted this book that looked rather risque, called The Treasure of Pleasant Valley. On the cover was a drawing of a woman who appeared to be wearing something that was basically see-through, but the symbolism was really great for me at that age at 16. And then I realized if I read the book, two of my classmates, girls, were volunteering in the library, and if they saw me taking out a book, they'd tell the boys, and then my reputation would be down because I was reading books, and I wanted them to know that all I could do is fight and cuss. And so finally it come to me, just steal a book. And so when I finished the book in about a week or two, I brought it back. Right. And when I put it back, that was another book by Frank Yerby. So I thought maybe I'll read that too. So I took it under my jacket, and later I brought it back. And that was another book by Frank Irby. So I took it. And I think that semester I read 4 books by Frank Irby. And several years, 13 to be exact, we were at a gathering at my high school for my class reunion. And the teacher who had been the librarian, Mrs. Mildred Grady, was there. She told me that she saw me take that book when I first took it. She said, first thought was to go over and tell him, boy, you don't have to steal a book. You can check them out. They're free. Then she realized what my situation was, and I could not let anybody know I was reading. So she said that she decided that if a old boy would read a book, she and Mrs. Saunders would drive to Memphis and find another one for me to read, and they would put it in the exact same place where the one I had taken was. And every time I took one out, they headed to Memphis to find another one. Now, you got to understand that this was not an easy matter then, because this is 1957 and 58, and black authors were not especially available, number one. And number two, Frank Irby was not such a widely known author. And number three, they had to drive all the way to Memphis to find it. And I credit Mrs. Grady for getting me in the habit of enjoying reading so that I was able to go to law school and survive.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
The story of Ollie Neal, who is now Judge Ollie Neal. He sat down with his daughter Karama in Little Rock, Arkansas. You can hear another story from StoryCorps about how a librarian got her start as a child who loved comic books by visiting our website later today at npr.org. All StoryCorps interviews are archived at the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress.
The context of white supremacy. Just wow. Ollie Neal, he became a judge. I don't know what to say. He became a judge. He became a judge. What in the... I don't know what to say. He became a judge. I mean, he became a judge. Like, man, reading is more important than watching television. Not even close. Just wow. At any rate, wow. And he was reading fiction too. I guess I should at least give a shout out for that, because he started off reading fiction, not nonfiction, and eventually got motivated to go on. And I guess he did have to do some nonfiction reading eventually to go on to get that judge and such to get through law school. So, wow. Mildred Grady, school librarian, reading more important than watching television. I cannot emphasize that enough. Like, man, this is before the Freedom Rides. If you don't know what the Freedom Rides are, they have books, documentaries, pictures. That's another one. Picture, 1,000 words. You can just look at some of the pictures. Whoa. That's years after Miss Grady was riding to Memphis. They said, I think it was like 70 miles that she had to drive. Even if you are riding, if you could have got that comfortable, like, man, I'm going to tell you, I don't even know how excited I would be now about we got to ride from Arkansas to Memphis 70 miles for a book. Man, for a black child who has been stealing these books and being rowdy, uppity. Like, oh, man, and then to do it multiple times. Gas ain't free now. I suspect it wasn't free then either. Wow. If anything, the whole book, but I mean that incident kind of encapsulates one massive takeaway for me. Whew. Black people not reading. That is, it even reminded me, remember when we read about Jonestown? Jim Jones stole books from black people, and that was early in, was Jonestown a CIA medical Experiment, Catherine Massey Book Club, what we've been reading for all them years. There you go. Then that's why there are all kinds of books out there. Like, you could stumble on anything once you get into, I mean, it is very easy once you, oh, okay, this reading is okay. You know, I like this. Hey, you might decide that one day, I'm not going to read the Pulp Fiction. Today, I'm going to read Was Jonestown a CIA Medical Experiment? Or The Delectable Negro, Human Consumption and Homoeroticism in U.S. Slave Culture. There's a whole lot of books that might, whoa, what have I been, what is going to, what did you have a whole lot of questions. I have turned the TV off and think for a little bit, like, what? Reading is more important than watching television. That's why white people do not want us to do it. This book gave me a much greater appreciation, even reminder of all of the extraordinary labor that white people have invested to condition us to not read and be repulsed by reading. Because they had black children like 100 years ago saying, ew, I don't want to go to the library. They don't have no books with black people in them. Ew, I don't want to go to the library. What do I want to go to the library for? All them books are for white people. They got that like 100 years ago. And the willful, deliberate effort, as he said in the book, of white people to make sure ain't going to be no Carter G. Woodson material here. You ain't going to be reading about no Althea Gibson here. You ain't going to be reading about no Harriet Tubman here. They still ain't got those $20 bills, you know. Reading is more important than watching. It gave me really even a whole deeper appreciation for Dr. Welsing saying that over. And that's one of those like she said that about as much as any of the sayings that she said frequently. The black self-respect, like things that she talked about all the time. Reading was up there. Get an A in Broom, read Mr. Fuller's work, things that she talked about all of the time. Reading is more important than watching television. Making time to read. I think it was our resident valedictorian, care made, attempted wife said, man, we put in our time. We invested. We got them books. And boom, boom, boom. Double O Dimple's going to be reading. Matter of fact, be literate Spanish, English, maybe German. You know, we can go over there and do our own counter-racist study, write a report about it, in German, no less. Reading. Matter of fact, he even talked about the race soldier. Remember, she said, race soldier came to the residence, take the dance class. Oh, my God, they got all this Negro literature. Oh, and it's got black pictures. And he's just flipped through and reads what. This book reminded me the years, centuries of labor. You could be killed for reading. Now, they say that during slavery. This book, hey, pull that on into the 20th century. Mess around and act like you want to be uppy and ask for the wrong books if you want to. Mess around and act like you want to come in this library if you want to. Mess around and beg too much for books for the Negro library if you want to. See what happens. Let us come in that Negro library and find you got the wrong books. See what happens. To you, your family, grandmother, pets. See what happens. Reading is more important than watching television. They even he describes it over and over. They would go to these black libraries and they would have no books, 12 books. It'd be the white libraries. They would have thousands. Even the white libraries in poor areas, they got better books than the Negroes. And when the Negroes would get books, they get the old dilapidated cast-off books from the white people falling apart. They said they would get encyclopedias that were so old and outdated as to be useless. They're going to come in the year 2025 and get you their 1995 encyclopedias. The Trial of the Century, O.J. Simpson. That's what the Negroes got to work with. And sometimes they slip in racist jokes. I've read that before, though, but they scrawl, because they know it's coming to the Negroes, so they put all the new, here you go, darky, have fun, write that all over it. And they said sometimes they had so much food and grease and dirt smeared all over them, there would be cockroaches would swarm all over the old books immediately. Probably did that. Delectable Negro. Anyway, with specifics, what we heard from Dr. Weigand, folks have any thoughts, what have you, inspired to read this book? You should be, and I think folks who've heard me over the 16 years, just because we have a guest, really, even if it's a non-white guest, I do not say, oh man, you should get this book and check it out just because they came on the program. I'll be honest. This book was very constructive. Very. You can underline, like, wow. Like I said, you could just flick to the pictures, really. And, whoa, what? White people rioting over one black female who wants to go to the University of Alabama. Roll Tide. They should have a whole exhibit to Arthur and Lacey at the University of Alabama. Like, forget Jalen Hurts, all the rest of the Negroes, Tua Tagovailoa, he just had brain damage. They give brain damage exhibit and put them in it later. But Arthur and Lacey, you got thousands of white people who came out to terrorize and try to kill one tiny black female who wanted to get books for Negroes. What does it mean to be white? Come on, that's another one I say. Study local history. If you are in Alabama, you've never heard, who is Arthur and Lacey? I've never, bing, there you go. Go to your local library, go online. If you have access, if you're close to the University of Alabama, which, unless I'm misinformed, I think is public, unless I'm misinformed, go to the University of Alabama. See what they got in the archives. You should be able to check like their student newspaper and see what was reported, and then check the local newspapers, see what they had to say, check the national newspapers. Did anybody write any reports about this at the school? Did the school do any reports about all this? Did any future students, did they write a dissertation on this, books about all of this? There you go, right there. You got a child or what have you, you grew up in Alabama, even if you're by yourself, that's my counter-racist study project right there. Local history, I don't know nothing about Miss Lacey. She tried to get books for Negroes. I'm going to read about Miss Lacey. I'm going to see as much info as I can get. It might take me 6 months. It might take me a year. Whatever. I'm going to research. If you got offspring, this black lady was trying to help get books for people like you. Report. You can go find out and give me a report. Who is authoring Lacey? You can do a video report, do a written report, whatever. Whatever you can think of, be creative, use your talents, but give me a report, go do some research. They got material at the library. That's the type of summer project I talk about. Your children get out of school. That could be really summer vacation, spring break, I think is coming up for a lot of folks soon. They got that week off or whatever it is. Summer vacation is looming. Get the winter holiday. They get 2-3 weeks, 2 months out of school. Projects. We're going to work that brain computer so we're not just sitting around streaming, watching TV, playing on your iPhone. We'll do some projects. Exercise your brain computer. And that right there is studying about white supremacy, racism, what they did to Arthur and Lacey. And again, she wasn't toting no pistol. She wasn't talking about, name calling, white cracker, this and crack. None of that. I'm just trying to go to school. And white people are ready to kill me. Tried to kill me. And would have if they could have got their hands on her. Easily. Again, this is before the Freedom Rides, and it's only 2 years after Emmett Till was killed. Maybe 3. I think it was 1958, so 3 years. That was 1955. 3 years. after Emmett Till was killed. So, and nobody was, convicted for that. So she could have been killed and nothing would have been done about it. They would have probably gloated about it. That'll teach the rest of you niggers. Stay away from our schools. Roll Tide. Any hoodles. Specific things I wanted to make sure I pointed out we got from the broadcast. Him saying, Ernestine Rose, who she's only mentioned one time in this book. Now, he said he wrote a whole separate book about her, what have you. If you can say definitively that this white woman is not racist, and she did all of these spectacular things and maybe rivals John Brown as the coolest not racist white person ever, she should have been in the book more than one time. That said, do you see that discrepancy? He can say, oh, Ernestine for sure ain't racist. Ain't got a racist bone in her body, and she hired niggers and all this, and had nigger friends and all this. Is it possible for a white person to do all that and still practice racism? Follow logic, y'all, man. White people do this all the time, man. I got black friends. I adopted a nigger. I voted for President Obama. You know I'm not racist. I love me some Anita Hill. Come on. I love me some Clarence Thomas. You know I'm not racist. Come on. But see, he could say, Ernestine not racist. When we got to the unnamed white librarian, and then blackface for Uncle Remus, Nights with even that. I said, man, that's kind of randy, isn't it, for a title? Nights with Uncle Remus? Like, what? Why is it nights? Why it could stories with Uncle Remus? Kicking it with Uncle Remus? Jokes with Uncle Remus? Nights with what are we creeping? Are we on the down low with Uncle Remus? Like what is going on? Delectable Negro, human consumption, and homoeroticism in U.S. slave culture. And I'm double entendre on that. You got a white boy dressed up like a Negro. Why are you dressed up? Can I get my hand on it right quick? Can I get my hand on it right quick? When Fuller say that white people practice racism not because black people are black, but because white people are not black. He said the other way, white people practice racism not because black people are not white, but because white people are not black. You could bring up Exhibit A, Nights with Uncle Remus. Nights with Uncle Remus? Why do you want to kick it with Uncle Remus at night? And do what? That warrants you dressing up and putting black paint on your skin as though you are upset that you are not melanated. The most familiar mystery. But Dr. Weigand, he couldn't say what was in that white woman's mind. He couldn't say, well, yeah, that does just look like a white woman practicing racism. She looks so happy and got a smile like she also got some randy thoughts, man. Nights with Uncle Remus. Now, I don't know if she was thinking that, but I mean, look at I'm going to put that picture up. I shared so many pictures from this. I don't know if I got the Uncle Remus photo, although shame on me if I did. And imagine if I had been shiftless. These pictures are near the end of the book. I have to go and get the exact page, but I think it's like 150. It's not the longest book. This book ends on page 218. And so the pictures, I think, are like 150 or somewhere there, kind of later. And you have to read like 4 or 5 chapters before you get to the pictures. Imagine if I had been shiftless and lazy and just read like 2 pages. What's the way that, so I told you the folks, well, now look here, Dr. Wiegand, I didn't read the whole book. I glanced at the preface, maybe. That's one thing, and missed I did post. Okay. You can go to social media. It's on all the social medias. Yay, Gus. I posted it early too. So you can go and you can see this image. That's what I'm talking about. And make sure you look hard on the right. It's an extra white woman cheesing hard. Don't nobody look embarrassed Don't nobody look concerned? Like my grandchildren, whoa, y'all gonna have my green, they can put this on IG and have me all embarrassed thinking I'm a racist. Whoa, man, I don't even get down like that. Ain't nobody got that. They are cheesing hard. We might have to read Nights with Uncle Remus. Like, what is all the, what? The most familiar mystery. Now, he also, within that, he couldn't say, what this white woman was thinking. I don't be putting thoughts in her head. He said he didn't practice white supremacy racism. He got all the benefits, including growing up in a sundown town where he heard dozens, over 100 racist jokes that he won't tell us. In my view, that's an act of white supremacy racism right there, concealing. You're concealing constructive information. My feelings aren't hurt. I don't even know what you mean by saying, oh, I'm so deeply pained. It just hurt me so much. Oh, it feel like somebody done just stomped on my groin. Oh, you wounded me, Gus. You can't make me say it. Oh, I can't tell no nigger jokes. Oh, come on, man. White people tell nigger jokes. You done heard 100. You'd be dead if it was that painful. The way they done talked about hammering Hank Aaron for all them decades, you'd have been dead a long time ago. You would have never made it out of Wisconsin. And then you see pattern. You see how many white people, they do the same thing. Oh no, no, Gus. It's the worst thing ever. I can't repeat no racist jokes. But I did hear about 15,000 of them. we talking, but yeah, I can't repeat. Practice racism. I don't practice no racism. Now I get all the benefits. Now I get all the goodies that a white man can get. I get extra goodies some days for being a white man, but practice, I don't do no practicing of racism out here in Wisconsin. What you mean practice racism? You don't think teaching at a grad school that almost excludes black people, especially from the library program, you don't think that's practicing? Whoa, what you mean practicing? I'm not even in charge at the school. I just teach the program, and I can't go out and make the black people come to the class. And what you mean practicing? And I do get the goodies now teaching. I get the goodies, but I talk about the racism and all that, like Tim Wise and a lot of other white people that we've had on the program who admit to being racist, even though they talk about racism. Can a white person talk about racism, still practice racism? If a white person can put their penis in a black person's vagina or rectum and still practice white supremacy racism, I think somebody classified as white can run their mouth, flap their gums about racism while still practicing racism. Yes, I do. And I think he has examples of that in the book. And I think he might be an example of that himself. Follow logic. Are you informed about racism? Now we did get, yes, I am informed, which is rare. The general pattern, most white people, I'm not informed. I don't know, man, I can't even spell racist. What you mean informed? Leroy is an expert on racism. Lakeisha is an expert. Not me. No, sir. Doctor, professor. I'm still learning, Gus. He didn't do that. And quickly, no pussyfooting. Yes, I am informed. Born in a sundown town. Of course. How could you be ignorant? But we get to the non-white people are more informed. I've learned more from them. Now, when I asked him about slavery, he said it was confusing. I haven't asked that question before, so maybe it can be refined. I think I was rather specific in terms of data. Who do you think is more informed about the plantation? How many barrels of molasses do we have? When do we sell the barrel of molasses? How many barrels of molasses do we get if we sell George? When do we sell George? How many people would like to buy George? Who knows all of that? How much hay do we need to run the plantation? How many shackles do we need? How much do shackles cost? Who knows all of that information? I said how the plantation works. Ooh, I can't answer that. Now that right there stood out as suspicious. Ooh, I ain't going to answer that one. Almost, he did that to one of the earlier questions about white women in the 20th century practicing racism. These, ooh, I don't want to get in trouble with them white. Incidentally, Cat Williams said the same thing. I am scared of them white women. I don't want no smoke with them white women at all. Let's get back on Diddy or Bill Cosby or some, yeah. Let's wrap it up. All right. Don't want to smoke with the white woman. I moved from the plantation. How about the prison? That's more modern, right? We're not on the plantation, so they say. Let's go about the prison system, because jails are bursting. Everywhere read Michelle Alexander knew Jim Crow, right? Who is more informed about the prison? I'll tell listeners now, I thought about that because they do qualify as metaphors, but these are actual structures of white supremacy racism that exist. And with the prison, that is current. This isn't something that, oh, you're talking abstracts. No. Right down the road where Leroy is locked up at. Prison, school, pipeline, all that. You don't want Leroy reading, so now he can go sit in solitary confinement. And also not read, because you don't put no books in the library either. That's one of the first cuts. Who's more informed about that environment? Same thing. How it works. Now that one, we got it quick. Oh, I think the guards. Yeah, they know how it runs. That right there, according to everyone, system of white supremacy racism. Naked. Lock up Leroy. How would it be that white people are more informed about the prison, what it is, how it works? How would it be that would radically shift once you get out of the prison? Now white people is ignorant. And now it's Leroy. Once he gets outside, now he's got the upper hand. That doesn't even make sense. If we had same logic for the prison. If these prisoners were that smart, this would be a dangerous environment. They probably not going to be locked up too much longer. That ain't the case for Leroy. White people got us in a chokehold. They've had us in a chokehold for, I don't know, before the Mayflower. Any hoodles, we shall observe. That's one of the questions I try to always make sure that we ask white people, if I ask directly, or listeners, whatever it is, to make sure we see how they respond. Any hoodles, let's see, anything else I want to make sure highlight from what we discussed. He also did the same pattern when he talked about he mentioned Desmond Tutu and talking about silence. He said so much of that's in the title of the book, quoting non-white people who are deceased in terms of their views on white supremacy, racism, and their assessment of how the system works. When I've said consistently, no, white people are most informed easily. Desmond Tutu, no disrespect, VGQ, but he is not the expert on racism, white supremacy. And even he said James Baldwin, he was listing his so-called heroes. It was Hank Aaron, Dr. King, Desmond Tutu. I think he might have mentioned one more person in the civil rights group. I don't remember who it was. Little Rock 9, I think he said collectively. We read about them, like I said, Catherine Massey, book club, 2012. That's like amongst the first reports of books, rather, that we read about the Little Rock 9. Any hoodles. Let's see. Make sure I didn't miss anything else that I wanted to bring up. Oh, and are white people often sincerely and greatly pained by racism? That would be, it might even be one to go back and rewind once you listen to the program or what have you. His initial response, and I think it happened that way a few times, where he responded, and I think it was like he was processing to himself, oops, I revealed too much truth to this Negro. Let me reword my response. And that was one of the first, when I asked him, did he think there was a significant number of white people who were greatly pained about racism? And his first response, he said no. And he went to his Sundown Town illustration, and he paused. He said, well, let me answer it this way. And that was when he said, that's about as much as I could do with that question. Now, he said, no, I don't think so. He went to the sundown town, which, following logic, that makes sense. Racially restricted region. We read James Lowen. They put the billboards up, no niggers. If you can't read, run, nigger. That's not pained. That's not sad. We are doing exactly what we want and tickled to death about it. And in fact, show up here if you want to. We're not ignorant about how did this place become no Negro? Wait, how? What happened? What? That's not it at all. It's, wait a minute, Negro. Get him! Didn't you read the sign, Negro? Well, if you didn't, you're going to understand now. Get him! James Lowen told us the children did that. That means by 10. Same thing he told us. He said by 10 years old, not 15, by 10 years old. I got it. Oh, Hank Aaron, but not buy no house over here. That's hammering Hank Aaron. Hank Aaron bet not buy no house over here. That's another one where I say it ain't no such thing as middle class. You see that now. Hank Aaron, that's not no poor trifling nigger that's going to rape your daughter. That's hammering Hank Aaron. Yeah. We miss you, hammering Hank Aaron. And naming the baseball team the Braves. We don't even deal with niggers or Indians, but we're going to name the team the Braves. Anywho, anything else? Make sure I get in from Dr. Weigand. Insistence, we got it again today, that not all white people is racist, even though he said it directly in the book. All of these white people participate in the system of racism, white supremacy. How could they not? How could they not? What exactly would you have to do as a white person to not participate in the system of white supremacy racism? If you got an answer to that one, let us know. Any hoodles. We will be here maybe Wednesday. I have to double check. Man, I got to go back and get my email. We have been active at minimum for the end of winter 2025. The wildfires and all the rest on our grind now that we're back a little bit more comfortably from the California return. But we should be here, I think, Wednesday. I have to double check and confirm. I'll post online and everything and let everybody know once I have information about whether or not we'll be there for Wednesday. But if we're here Wednesday, it'll be early because our guest will be here from outside the U.S. So massive time difference. I hate those because I hate those. It'll be early, but I think like early 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific early. I could vomit early. But hey, it's important global system. So I think we'll be here early Wednesday. I'll confirm by later today, early tomorrow. Anywho. Let's see. So with us, caller 0185. Did you have commentary, 0185? If you had thought, Dr. Weigand, anything constructive from the broadcast?
Yes. Am I on?
Yes, sir.
Oh, yes. Well, I'm still confused. I'm calling from Florida, Ron DeSantis state. I did put in a request to see if my local library would get the book in, but they do have censorship in Florida, so I did put in a request for them to get that book. See if anything will come of it. I'm still confused about the fact with his mother. When he said something about she saw the, I don't. Could you clear that up a little bit? Because I'm like, I don't get that because he lost me with that.
He put the request in already. If you could let us know, yay or nay. If they don't get it, to be expected, usual standard operating procedure. Pardon. But if they do get it, check it out. At minimum, Look at the pictures at minimum. Bravo there, sir. You can let us know what happened. You can even drop me an email. Let us know what happens. With the incident with his white mom, racist, based on what he said. So he says that if you're talking about the one that's later on, he says he goes back to Wisconsin, racially restricted region, and he says that he asked her if there were any black people in the city. And she said no. He said he looked to the right. There was a black person walking on the sidewalk. He says, well, hey, there's a black person right there. And she says, well, he can't help it. Now, I said if that's the part you're talking about?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I said, I was with you, sir. I didn't understand what that meant either. Like, what does she mean? What does that mean? Like, I didn't even know how to respond. Like, if I had been there and she said that to me, like, I wouldn't have known, like, should I be offended? Did she say something racist? Like, I would have had to ask, like, what does that mean? Like, he can't help it. What does that mean? And the way he explained it, if I understood it correctly, well, he's negro. We do have a black person there. She was, well, he can't help it. That's, just so sad for him. He was born that way. It's nothing he can do about it. Poor negro. God just chose him to be a negro, mark of Ham, and, throw him a nickel if you got it, type of a thing. That's the way that I understood it.
Now, you did let him off of the hook because he said he did tell racist jokes when he was young, but he didn't tell them anymore. So you kind of let him off the hook on that one.
I don't know what you mean by letting off the hook. Metaphor? Do I have a hook?
Yeah, it's a metaphor. I think you should have drilled down on him a little bit harder because he did admit that he said these jokes in the past, but he didn't say them anymore. These racist jokes.
Right. I don't have a drill either. So you just mean, should I have asked him does he still tell these jokes, or what question should I have asked specifically just to get more information from him?
Well, I think that I do like the way that you do. You speak to the people to try to get to the heart of the matter, and I think that he was being a little evasive, and I think that you could have been a little more forceful to get a more direct answer out of him.
White people are for sure evasive liars. When you say, I guess to get more information or be more, what specific, do you think he still tells racist jokes, or what details did you want to get specifically?
Correct. I think that they're, like you said, in their particular areas, when it's only them, I think they still say them, or they're in the company of others who say them, and they still, as you've already said, that there's plenty of books that detail all the negro jokes that they have a hoot telling amongst themselves. So I still think that they, he's I'm sure he's, and there's certain, when he's with certain groups of people, that he still is practicing what they always practice. This is what they do.
Say it 2 times. This is what they do. That's my word. Hoot, sir. I say that. Don't be stealing my words. He did say, when he hears them now, he walks away. Do you remember that part? He did say that to imply that this is not that's 60, 70 years back when I was still in Wisconsin. He did say that. So for sure, this is, ongoing thing, whatever. But you just think I should have asked him more to get, like, either asking him, do you tell any racist jokes now? Is this a current thing? So he can't just put this all, this is, way back yesteryear, 1912 or something like that.
Correct. And
Gotcha.
then you're 70 years old, so you're not moving that fast away from the conversation that that you're a part of. Okay, so do you get a little laugh in before you walk away?
White people tell some racist jokes, man. Which, I mean, heck, Hank Aaron, through and through, white people tell some racist jokes. I didn't even get Jeff Dahmer. Anyway, did anything else stand out, his responses or any other questions that you wanted to ask or should have been asked?
Yeah, I think that to refine your question, you can say the makers of white supremacy, would they understand it more than black people or people who are non-white? You say you may need to refine it a little bit,
I've heard listeners ask that as well in terms of who is responsible for refining the system, because obviously it doesn't operate the same way as the Hank Aaron days. And I think the whites, when they've been asked that on this platform, they've been pretty consistent and quick, I will add, to say that white people do the refining. So, yeah, that's one where it's a little bit more difficult. Like, come on, somebody has to be doing same way your computer gets updates. Man, there has to be some serious, and all over the world, all areas of people activity updates to keep white people in unison about what to do about their negros.
Right.
Was that anything else?
I think that's very fascinating. How they don't want to admit, they see that, or they seem to think because they do stuff, because you hear this, I work for the NAACP, or I do this and that, or I know I have black friends, the common one. They think that they can't be racist still and practice white supremacy just because they do those things, and they think that it's just befuddling to me how they think that when they reap all the benefits. You're either a passive or you're active. You're still doing and benefiting from white supremacy, whether you're passive or active. So,
absolutely. I would just because you did say it befuddles you, I would humbly submit, I could be wrong, still learning myself, worthless Negro, but I think it's a slight difference. I don't think white people think that. I don't think white people themselves think that they are not racist and or are even friends with black people or any of that. I don't think white people think, I'm not racist, Leroy. I'm friends with Nita Hill and all that. That's not, they want non-white people to think, Megan adopted a Negro. Megan is not racist. Dr. Weigand, he wrote that book, man, and talks about this, all that. Dr. Weigand is not racist. Juliet, she came down here and tried to get us these books and stuff and all that and risked her life and that. She is not. That's what they want us to think. That is practicing deception. Right. That is not what they think, because then they leave after saying that to us and do what you just said, go back and start telling nigger jokes. So they know that's not true once they get back around all white people. So that's just my humble opinion. I think that's the difference. It's not that white people, they just say that so that we believe that lie and so that we think that way.
Oh yeah, you just nailed it for me. Thank you. You just opened up my my whole new understanding for me there. I do want to give a book suggestion. Dante D. King just wrote a new book. Oh gosh, it's a long title. So maybe this is one that you can add to the reading. 1 second here. It's called Diagnosing Whiteness and Anti-Blackness, White Psychopathy, Collective Psychosis, and Trauma in America.
Reading more important than watching television. Much obliged, sir, for the book. Now, I do point out for listeners, I do not accept suggestions for the book club. I got it for a billion reasons that I don't even get into detail now, but thank you kindly. Just so that folks don't get inspired, Gus T does not accept suggestions for the book club. If you do find a great book, though, share, let us know. That's great. But yes, book club, I got it. Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Yep. That has been a hoot. Any hoodles. We even did overtime. Did you have anything else? Are you good?
No, that's good, sir. I thank you for clearing some things up for me.
Right on. Gus T has been accused of talking crazy, so ponder on it, see if it makes sense tomorrow. But that is an important one. I think white people say a lot of things that they don't necessarily believe, that are lies, that they just want us, the victims, non-white people, to believe, and they are very successful at it. One of them being, not all white people are racist. Just based on what I read from the text where he said all white people participate. That was so serendipitous because I did not intend to read that passage at that point, but I did intend to read that passage for the very reason that I pointed out. All participate. I think that might have been another one of those examples of where he revealed more truth than he intended. That'll be my last one. Do you remember that part, sir, at the beginning when I asked him if a significant number of people classified as white are sincerely, greatly pained about racism? When he started his response, he said, no. I don't think a lot. I have to get the exact phrase, but it was no. I don't think there are a lot of people. And then he segued to Wisconsin and no black people and all of that. And he said, I have to leave it there. And then when I said, did you start all this saying that no, I don't think a significant number of white people are greatly pained? He said, no. I do think. And he went the exact. Do you know what I'm talking about? Or am I mistaken in how he responded there?
No, you're exactly correct. That's what I got from it. I thought he was in touch originally when he originally said that, but then when he changed over, because I guess he thought you were trying to trap him, and he tried to correct him, make a course correction, which was bad on his part.
Master deceivers. I think he did that a few times. Like, I'd have to go back and listen and, like, put marks there. Even that passage, I think, is one for him to come out and say, well, what do you mean not all white people is racist? And that's not what you said, brother. They all participated, willingly or no. And real talk, you cannot be white and be ignorant about racism. And he got it right there in the book. White people will let you know when you have messed up. What book did you get? How many niggers did you hire? He even got that in the book. They had a white man. He got, I think, like, let's say 1,000 more books. It wasn't, because it wasn't massive. Let's say 500 more books. Let's say he got 2,000 books for the white students, and he got 2,500 books for the black students. It wasn't something like, oh my gosh, he hired 500 black librarians, or, he got like 8,000 books for the black children and 2 books for the white. It wasn't something like, it was just 2,500 books for the black children, 200 for the white children, in a context where people had already acknowledged black children had way less books. They fired him immediately once they found that out. You cannot be ignorant about racism if you are white. White people will let you know immediately. He said he knew by 10. He didn't say he was ignorant about racism. He said, Fuller said 15. I've heard some audio where Fuller has said 10. He said by 10. Whoa. They don't let Negroes buy houses. That's sophisticated, too, real estate. They don't let even, not just Negroes, Hank Aaron. That's like, whoa, Bron James can't get a house? No. Bron James can't get a house here. Beat it. We'll take Luca, though. We will be here maybe Wednesday. Maybe. I'll confirm. If it is Wednesday with a white man outside the U.S., cannot wait. Global system of racism. If you put in a request for this book, let me know. You can dial in future programs, or you can drop me an email, and I'll share on the broadcast. Even if they don't get it, cool in the gang. In fact, that'd be great too. If you don't get it, just let us know what they said. If they give you an email, or get the hell out of here. We sent the FBI your contact information for even asking on a book like this. If they ban you from the library, whatever. Let us know what they say if they don't get it. If they do get it, take a picture. That would be cracking. And then you can let me know what you think about the blackface photo in the book. Much obliged, good sir. Thank you for dialing in. Hopefully it was worthy of your Sunday evening. Big chunk of Sunday evening. Sobriety.
You're very worthy, guest. I tell you, you make a person think, and that's what we're lacking severely these days. And I do appreciate you, and I do love your hard questions. And you don't let these people escape a lot of times, and you get a direct answer. So I really appreciate that. And I told my wife about you, and I'm trying to get her to listen, but she watched too much TV.
I can't do it. I don't. Man, I love me some TV too. I sit around and listen to retarded Gus T talking about whatever. Netflix always got something good. I'm like, Netflix always got something good on. So, shout out to the wife, victim. Replace white supremacy with justice. Hey, watch something constructive. That's what I'll say. Watch something good. Maybe they'll have documentary or something. She could watch soundtrack to Coup d'etat. Maybe y'all can watch that because that was so good. Even though it didn't win for best documentary, y'all can watch that and have a chat. But oh well. Much obliged. Thanks for trying, sir. Sobriety would be best. Either way. Keep that brain computer, even if you're not going to listen to the cows. We still need highly functioning brain computers so that we can solve our problems. Race soldiers do not want us reading, and he just said it. Race soldiers do not want us thinking. Preserve that brain computer. That's what we need, like high-level thinking. Any hoodles.
Yes.
Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. No name calling black people. No wasting non-white people's time and energy. Stop being discourteous to black people. Stop gossiping. Stop producing throwaway offspring. More reading. Cow signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. Problem. You're a victim. I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.